The surgeon's voice cut through the entire floor like a blade. "Get her out of my OR, now!" Security arrived in under 90 seconds. Two guards, badges catching the fluorescent light, hands already reaching for her arms before she had finished her sentence. The residents looked at their shoes. The nurses looked at the wall. Dr. Marcus Holt stood at the center of the trauma bay with his arms crossed and his chin lifted, and he watched a decorated combat medic get walked out of Veyron General Hospital like she had stolen something off the supply cart. Her name was Dana Reeves. She was 41 years old. She had a coffee stain on her left scrub pocket she hadn't noticed yet, and 30 seconds ago she had told the most powerful surgeon in Kellerton City that his patient had an internal bleed he had missed. He fired her on the spot. 6 minutes later, that patient coded. If this is your first time here, follow the channel, hit like, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning had started the way most mornings started in the ICU at Veyron General. Fluorescent lights buzzing at that particular frequency that burrowed into your skull after hour 10, the low mechanical rhythm of ventilators cycling through their programmed intervals, and the specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but simply accumulates in your joints and behind your eyes, until moving feels like pushing through shallow water. Dana Reeves had been on since 6 the previous evening. It was now 7:15 in the morning, and she was standing at the foot of bed 7 with a post-op chart in her hands, reviewing a 53-year-old man named Gerald Foss, who had come through a laparoscopic abdominal procedure 4 hours earlier and who was not, in her clinical judgment, recovering the way he should have been. She was not the kind of nurse who panicked. That was not a personality trait she'd been born with. It was something that had been built into her over years and circumstances that had nothing to do with hospital corridors or nursing rotations. She had learned to keep her internal temperature flat when everything around her was accelerating, and she kept it flat now. She was simply standing at Gerald Foss's bedside with the overhead lights humming and the monitor beeping its slow, slightly too fast rhythm, and she was noting things. His blood pressure, trending down. Not dramatically. Nothing that would trigger an automated alarm yet. But trending, 118/74 at 0540, then 112/70 at 0610, then 106/68 at 0645. Small movements, each one within the margin of normal variation, but together forming a direction. A story. His heart rate climbing. Slowly, quietly, the way the body compensates when it's trying to maintain perfusion against a pressure it's starting to lose. At 0540, he'd been at 78. Now he was at 91. Still technically normal, still technically fine. His skin, when she'd pressed 2 fingers against the back of his hand and released, slow to refill. A beat and a half when it should have been 1. His abdomen, when she had done her assessment at 0650, slightly distended. Not dramatically. Not the rigid board-like presentation you'd see in a full hemorrhage, but more than it had been at the previous check. Fuller. Tender, too, when she'd pressed gently along the lower left quadrant, though Foss had been drowsy from the anesthesia wearing off and hadn't clearly articulated the pain so much as made a sound and turned his head away. She had flagged her concerns in the chart at 0710. She had paged the resident on call at 0714. The resident, a second-year named Pollard, who had the hollow, slightly translucent look of a man who hadn't slept in 30 hours, had reviewed the same numbers and said, without looking up from his phone, "He's stable. Post-op vitals fluctuate. Let's give it another hour and recheck." Dana had given it 40 minutes. She watched Foss's pressure drop 4 more points. She watched his heart rate tick to 94. She watched him shift uncomfortably in the bed and press one hand weakly to his left side. Then she went looking for someone with more authority than Pollard. The problem was, the someone she found was Dr. Marcus Holt. Holt was the chief of surgical services at Veyron General Hospital. He was 56 years old, silver-haired in a way that looked deliberate, and he carried himself through the corridors with the particular authority of a man who had been told he was the best in the room so consistently over so many years that the idea of being questioned had become genuinely inconceivable to him. His outcomes were real. His complication rates were low, his surgical technique was precise, his reputation in the city was legitimate. None of that was invented. What was also real, and what every nurse in the building knew from institutional memory passed down like folklore, was that Holt responded to challenges the way certain systems respond to foreign bodies, with immediate, organized rejection. He had pushed 2 charge nurses into transfer requests in the past 18 months. He had filed a formal complaint against a hospitalist who had raised concerns about one of his patients at a care conference, accusing the man of undermining surgical oversight. He had, on 2 separate documented occasions, reduced nursing staff to tears in public corridors, and then looked genuinely puzzled when HR became involved. Dana knew all of this. She had been at Veron General for 3 years, and she had made it her business to understand the landscape. She knew who was good under pressure and who fell apart. She knew which residents were sharp and which ones were filling time until a fellowship slot opened up. She knew that Holt was technically excellent and interpersonally volatile, and she knew that walking up to him between the scrub sink and the OR doors and telling him she believed he had missed a post-operative bleed was going to go badly. She did it anyway, because the alternative was watching Gerald Foss quietly deteriorate in bed 7 while the clock ran, and that was not something she was capable of choosing. Dr. Holt. She fell into step beside him, keeping her voice even. I need 2 minutes about Gerald Foss. Room 7, your laparoscopic from last night. Holt didn't slow down. Foss is stable. I reviewed him at 6. His pressure's been dropping since 5:30. 13 points over 90 minutes, and his heart rate is compensating. His abdomen is distended compared to the 0-200 check. I think there's an internal bleed that didn't show on the post-op imaging. That stopped him. He turned, and the look on his face was not the look of a surgeon reconsidering his assessment. It was the look of a man deciding how to characterize an insult. You think, he said. His cap refill is sluggish. The trend on his MAP is going the wrong direction, given the location of the surgical site and the... You're reading trends on a post-op patient who is 6 hours out from general anesthesia. His voice was flat and instructional, the tone of someone correcting a student who has misunderstood a basic concept. Hemodynamic variability in that window is expected. It is normal. It does not indicate a missed surgical complication. His abdomen is... Did you do a physical examination? I did my nursing assessment at... Did you do a physical examination? He repeated, slower, as if the pace would make the distinction clearer. Because you're a nurse, Miss... He glanced at her badge. Reeves. And I am a board-certified surgical chief who personally closed that patient at 2 in the morning and reviewed him 4 hours later. And what you are describing to me right now in this corridor in front of... He didn't finish the sentence, but he looked past her, and she heard it in the look, is not a clinical concern. It is overreach. 2 residents had stopped walking. A scrub tech was lingering at the supply cart. Carol Dix, the nursing supervisor on days, had appeared at the far end of the corridor with a tablet under her arm and had gone very still. Dana kept her voice level. I've documented my assessment in the chart. I'm asking for a second look before his pressure drops further. That's all. Are you challenging my clinical judgment? It was not a question. I'm asking for a patient to be reassessed. In a public corridor. He said it slowly, the way a prosecutor lays out evidence. In front of my residents, after I've already told you the patient is stable. With respect, stop. The word was quiet and complete. He looked at Carol Dix. Carol, call security up here. Dana heard the words. She processed them. There was a particular clarity that came over her in moments when things moved into their worst possible shape. Not calm exactly, but focus. The noise dropped away, and what remained was simply what was true. You're serious, she said. Your badge. He extended his hand, palm up. You're terminated. Insubordination and disruption of clinical operations during surgical hours. There is a man in room 7 who I believe is bleeding internally. Your badge, Ms. Reeves. She looked at him. She looked at the extended hand. She looked past him at the residents, who were now intensely interested in the floor. She looked at Carol Dix, who was speaking quietly into her radio with her eyes cast down. She had been in situations before where the wrong person had the authority, where the hierarchy and the truth had pointed in opposite directions, and the hierarchy had won. She had not liked it those times either. She unclipped her badge. She set it in his palm. Document the time, she said, and please have someone recheck his blood pressure before the next scheduled assessment. He was already walking away. The security guards appeared from the elevator, 2 of them, young, visibly uncomfortable. One held the elevator door, the other gestured toward it with an apologetic look that he probably didn't realize he was making. "Ma'am, we need to escort you out." She picked up her bag from behind the nursing station. She did not slam anything. She did not raise her voice. She did not make eye contact with the residents who were studiously not watching her. The ward was loud and full and operational, and the hospital moved forward as it always did, smoothly, relentlessly, as if this specific moment were simply a minor administrative correction. An older woman in room 9, admitted 3 days ago for a hip fracture, name of Iris, 72 years old and sharp as a scalpel, reached out as Dana passed and caught her wrist with surprising firmness. "I heard all of that," Iris said. Dana looked at her. "It'll sort itself out." "You're not scared?" "Not of him." Iris held her gaze for a moment. "What are you scared of, then?" Dana glanced back toward room 7. "Being too slow," she said. She walked to the elevator. The doors opened. She stepped in. The doors closed, and the last thing she saw before the car descended was the corridor continuing its business without her. Nurses moving, carts rolling, the machinery of care proceeding. And room 7, just visible at the far end of the hall, quiet and unremarkable, its monitor alarm not yet sounding. Not yet. She sat in her car on level 2 of the parking structure with her keys in her right hand and her bag on the passenger seat and the engine off. The concrete was dim and smelled of exhaust and damp. She could hear, faintly, the ambient noise of the hospital rising through the open levels above, doors, intercoms, the distant chirp of monitor alerts being silenced. She was not sure how long she had been sitting there when the PA broke through. It came through the open stairwell door 10 feet from her car, attenuated, slightly distorted by concrete and distance, but unmistakable. Code blue. ICU. Room 7. Code blue. ICU. Room 7. All available personnel respond. She sat with that for a moment. The key was in her hand. She looked at it. She was a terminated employee. She had no badge, no active credentials, no standing to walk back into that building and involve herself in a clinical situation. She was, by every administrative and institutional measure, done. She turned the key and started the engine. Then she sat for another moment with the engine running. There was a thing she had understood since she was 23 years old. Not from nursing school, not from any lecture or textbook or mentor, but from a specific night in a specific place that she did not talk about, where she had been the only person available and the only person with the knowledge, and the question had been very simple. Was she going to act or not? Every version of that question she had faced since then was downstream of that first one, and the answer had always been the same. She put the car in reverse. She came back in through the ambulance bay. It was a calculated choice. The main entrance had badge readers that had already been updated with her termination, but the bay's interior access doors had been flagging a maintenance issue for 6 weeks, a reader that intermittently failed to log entries. She'd submitted the maintenance report herself in February. It still hadn't been fixed. She walked in like she was supposed to be there, which, in every way that actually mattered to her, she was. The ICU was controlled chaos, the focused, purposeful intensity of an active resuscitation. Through the glass wall, she could see room 7 surrounded by bodies, 2 residents, an attending she didn't recognize, 3 nurses, a respiratory tech managing the airway. The crash cart was open. Someone was pushing fluids wide. On the monitor, she could see the pressure reading even from the corridor, 78/52 and still dropping. Holt was at the periphery, arms crossed, jaw tight, the expression of a man watching a situation deteriorate that he had, 45 minutes ago, assured everyone was not deteriorating. Dana did not go into the room. Not yet. She went to the nursing station. Her login was still active. IT hadn't processed the termination yet, which happened sometimes when the administrative paperwork lagged behind the event. She pulled Foss's chart on the terminal. She opened his medication reconciliation. She opened his intake notes and his pre-op screening and his anesthesia record, and she read fast, the way she had learned to read in conditions where reading slowly meant someone died. She found it in 5 minutes and 40 seconds. Not just the missed bleed, though that was there, visible in retrospect in the imaging that hadn't been interpreted aggressively enough because no one was looking for it. Something else. Something worse, in some ways, because it was not a surgical error, but a systems failure. A medication interaction between the rivaroxaban Gerald Foss had been taking for his atrial fibrillation history, listed in his chart, flagged in his intake, acknowledged in the pre-op note, and ketorolac, the anti-inflammatory that had been ordered for post-operative pain management at midnight. The interaction was documented. There was even a soft alert in the system that had been acknowledged and overridden, the way soft alerts almost always were, because the system generated so many of them that acknowledging them became automatic. The interaction was amplifying the bleed. The anticoagulant effect of the rivaroxaban, compounded by the ketorolac platelet interference, had turned what might have been a slow, manageable post-operative ooze into something the body couldn't compensate for forever. And if the team in that room was about to give reversal agents without first stabilizing the volume, which was the standard initial move in a bleed of this apparent severity, they were going to reverse the anticoagulation and potentially throw a clot into a cardiovascular system that was already under extreme stress. She printed the relevant pages. She walked to the door of room 7 and pushed it open without knocking, because in an active resuscitation, you do not knock. He has a rivaroxaban ketorolac interaction, she said, clearly, without preamble. It's been compounding the bleed since midnight. Do not give the reversal agent until you've replaced volume. You'll overcorrect the coagulation cascade and risk throwing a clot. He needs XLAP to find the source. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something said aloud reconfigures everything everyone in the room was about to do. The attending, Dr. Priya Anand, a hospitalist Dana had worked alongside for 2 years, one of the genuinely competent ones, looked at the papers Dana was holding, then at the monitor, then at Dana. "Show me," Anand said. Dana stepped forward and set the printed pages on the bedside table, pointing to the medication reconciliation and the interaction flag and the timeline of vital sign deterioration. Holt's voice came from behind her, tight and dangerous. "She does not work here. She needs to be removed immediately." "Marcus?" Anand did not look at him. "Not right now." "She is a terminated employee who has accessed this patient's—" "Not right now." There was iron in it. Anand was already reading, already moving. "Hold the reversal agent," she said to the resident. "Give me a type and cross. Get me a repeat abdomen ultrasound at the bedside now and page the on-call surgery fellow for emergency exploratory." She looked at the respiratory tech. "What's his SAT?" 92 and holding. "Keep him there." She was already moving to the bedside, already examining, already commanding the room with the particular authority that comes from being right and knowing it. Dana stepped back. She had delivered what she came to deliver. The team was moving. Anand was running it clean and fast, and Gerald Foss now had something he hadn't had 8 minutes ago, which was an accurate picture of what was happening to his body. She turned for the door. Holt was there, not blocking it, not physically, but close enough that she would have to pass within arm's reach. His face had the color of controlled fury. "You accessed a secured system without authorization," he said, low. "You entered a restricted patient area after termination. You interfered with an active resuscitation. I will have you arrested. I will have your nursing license referred for emergency suspension. I will make sure you never work in healthcare in this state again." She looked at him. He was not wrong about the technical violations. She had done all of those things. "Write up everything you just listed," she said. "And while you're doing that, someone should go check whether your incident report for this morning is going to match the chart documentation. Because there are timestamps in that system that are going to be very difficult to explain." She walked out. In the corridor, Carol Dix was standing against the wall with her tablet against her chest, and the expression of someone watching a building they work in start to crack along the foundation. "He's going to stabilize," Dana said as she passed. "Foss, if Anand moves fast enough." Carol said nothing for a moment. Then, "You should leave." "I know." She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. While she waited, she could hear, through the door of room 7, the sounds of the resuscitation shifting, the change in voice cadence, the different quality of movement, the controlled urgency of a team that now knew what they were dealing with. It sounded different from when she'd entered. It sounded like it was going to be okay. The elevator arrived. She got in. She was on level 3 of the parking structure this time, engine on, seat reclined 2 inches, trying to decide whether she was going to drive home or sit here until her body remembered it had been awake for over 14 hours, when her phone buzzed on the center console. Unknown number, local area code. She picked it up after 2 rings. Reeves. Ms. Reeves. The voice was male, measured, carrying the particular professional weight of someone who communicated high-pressure information as a job function. My name is Garrett. I'm coordinating with the Emergency Operations Desk at Kellerton Regional Dispatch. We're initiating a mass casualty activation at Veyron General Hospital, effective in approximately 11 minutes. I'm contacting you because your name is on an emergency notification roster maintained by the 9th Special Operations Support Group. Dana's hand tightened on the phone. How many casualties? She said. Current confirmed count is 31. We expect that number to change. They're coming out of an incident at a training compound approximately 40 miles east of the city. Multiple blast injuries, penetrating trauma, reported respiratory involvement from overpressure. Ground units and air assets are already rolling. A brief pause. Ms. Reeves, there is a classification notation attached to your name on this roster that I'm not authorized to discuss, but the directive is clear. We are required to notify you prior to unit arrival. Ikasam Botintiames. She was already moving her seat back upright. Give me the injury breakdown. She listened with her eyes forward and her hand on the key, and the other hand finding her notepad in her bag by feel, and as Garrett read through the field medic reports, blast lung on at least 4, 2 confirmed femoral hemorrhages, 3 probable traumatic brain injuries, 1 tension pneumothorax already needled and managed in the field, crush injuries across at least 6, multiple fragment wounds across a dozen more. She was doing the math. Veyron General's trauma capability was 8 simultaneous critical cases if the team was functioning at its absolute ceiling. Maybe 9 with Anand running concurrent resuscitations and 2 ORs active. 31 incoming, multiple critically unstable, hitting the door in 11 minutes meant the system would collapse under triage weight in under 20 minutes without immediate restructuring of the patient flow. She had restructured mass casualty flows before, not in simulation, not in training. She thanked Garrett and ended the call and was out of the car before she had consciously decided to move. She went back in through the ambulance bay. The doors of the hospital slid open and she came through into the bay corridor, and the first thing she heard was the overhead PA announcing the mass casualty activation in the flat, rehearsed tones of someone reading from a protocol card. Staff were moving in the hallway, not panicking, but fast, the particular rapid movement of people who know something large is coming and are trying to get into position. A charge nurse was on the phone. An attending was pulling on a gown. Dana walked to the ambulance bay entrance and stood in the open air. To the east, beyond the tree line, helicopters. She counted rotor sounds, 3 distinct aircraft, maybe 4. And beneath that, building on the highway, the staggered wail of ground units. She pulled on gloves from the rack at the bay entrance. She looked at the triage board through the internal window, empty, pristine, formatted for a day that had not yet understood what was about to be asked of it. The first ambulance came in fast. It swung into the bay with its lights still going, back doors already moving before the vehicle fully stopped. The flight medic who jumped out had blood on his forearms to the elbow and the particular focused urgency of someone who had been managing a deteriorating patient for too long in the back of a moving vehicle. 34-year-old male, bilateral lower extremity blast trauma, BP's been 78 over palp for the last 6 minutes. We've been running 2 large bore IVs wide open. He dropped his GCS in the last 4 minutes from 14 to 11. He looked up from the stretcher as they moved. He looked at Dana. He stopped his report for a half-second. It was brief, the kind of pause that only happens when recognition overrides training, and then he recovered. "Are you running this?" he said. She pulled the blanket aside and looked at the patient's legs and looked at his face and pressed 2 fingers to his neck and felt the pulse, rapid and weak, and then she looked at the medic. "Tell me his name," she said. "Torres, Sergeant First Class Torres." "Okay." She looked down at him. "Torres, I've got you." She looked up at the medic. "Who's next?" "2 more behind me. One's worse." "What's worse?" "Chest, field needled, but I think it retensioned on the way in." "Get him straight to Bay 2. Don't let anyone intubate before I see him." She raised her voice to the 2 nurses who had come out to assist. "Bay 2 is a tension pneumo, probable retention. Priority 1 over everything else currently in the department. Bay 1 is a hemorrhagic shock, bilateral lower extremity. He needs a massive transfusion protocol activated immediately, and I need a trauma surgeon at that bedside in the next 4 minutes. The nurses moved. Behind the first ambulance, a second was already pulling in. Behind that, on the highway approach, she could see the lights of a third. And the helicopters were close now, so say, close enough to feel the rotor wash beginning to move the air, close enough that she had to raise her voice over the sound of them, close enough that the sound was not abstract anymore, but immediate and enormous and real. Inside the hospital, the PA was still reading its mass casualty protocol in its measured, prepared voice, and the staff were moving to their stations, and Dr. Marcus Holt was somewhere in the building with her badge in his pocket, and a patient in room 7 who was, thanks to Priya Anand, probably going to survive the morning. Dana Reeves stood at the entrance of the ambulance bay with her gloves on and the helicopters coming in, and 31 people inbound who needed someone to make order out of what was about to become chaos, and she did the thing she had always done. She got to work. The second ambulance doors opened, and from inside it, before the medics could even begin their report, a voice, weak, strained, familiar in the way that certain voices are familiar not from personal acquaintance, but from the specific register of someone who has been trained in the same brutal schools, said one thing. One name. Reeves. She stepped forward, and the morning, which had already been the worst of her professional life, shifted into something else entirely. She stepped forward and pulled the ambulance doors the rest of the way open herself. The man inside was strapped to the backboard at a slight incline, oxygen mask fogged with each shallow breath, left arm splinted from wrist to mid-forearm with what looked like field improvised materials, part of a SAM splint and something that might have been cut from a tactical vest. His face was pale in the particular way that happens when the body has been redirecting blood from the periphery for long enough that it shows in the lips, around the eyes. He was conscious, but barely in the way that counts. Eyes open, tracking, but the tracking had that half-second lag that meant his brain was working harder than it should have had to. She didn't recognize him immediately. She recognized the look. She recognized the way he said her name, not like a question, not like a request, but like a coordinate, a fixed point in a deteriorating situation. "What's your name?" she said, moving alongside the stretcher as the medics began pulling it out. "Vasquez." A breath. "Staff Sergeant, Danny Vasquez." "Where are you hurting the most right now, Danny?" "Chest. Left side." Another breath, shorter. "Feels like I can't feel it all the way." The medic at the head of the stretcher caught her eye. "Retensioned on the way in. I needled him at the compound, got good air return, but that was 32 minutes ago." Dana put 2 fingers against the left side of Vasquez's neck and felt the trachea. Midline, but only just. She put her palm flat against his left chest wall and asked him to breathe as deep as he could, and what she felt was almost nothing, a fraction of the expansion on the right side, the chest wall trying and finding resistance. "Bay 2, she said. "Now. Don't stop moving." They moved. She moved with them, one hand on the stretcher rail, the other already reaching for the radio clipped to the nearest ER nurse's scrub top. "This is Bay 2, she said into it without asking. "I need a 14-gauge needle, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, set up and ready when I walk through the door. I also need a chest tube tray on standby, and someone get me a surgeon in that room. Not a resident, a surgeon. Static." Then a voice from inside that sounded rattled. "Who is this?" "The person telling you what Bay 2 needs. Do it." She handed the radio back. The bay doors opened automatically as the stretcher hit the sensor pad, and the noise of the ambulance receiving area dropped away behind her and they were inside. And the inside of Veyron General's trauma department at that particular moment was the specific kind of organized confusion that happens in the first 6 minutes of a mass casualty event before someone imposes a structure on it. People were moving, equipment was being pulled. Voices overlapped. 2 stretchers were already parked in the main corridor with staff clustered around them, and a third was coming through the main entrance doors, and the overhead PA was still talking about the mass casualty protocol in its calm, prepared voice, which at this point felt completely detached from what was actually happening in the building. Dana got Vasquez into Bay 2. The setup she'd called for was there. One of the trauma nurses, a woman named Pettit, who Dana had worked with for 2 years, had the needle ready, and was already tearing the packaging on a Heimlich valve. Pettit looked up when Dana came through the door, and something shifted in her face. Not surprise exactly, more like the specific relief of a person who has just realized help is here. "You've got him?" Pettit said. "I've got him. What's his O2 sat?" 88. "Okay." Dana positioned herself at the left chest wall, found her landmarks with 2 fingers, second rib, midclavicular, just over the top edge of the rib to avoid the neurovascular bundle. And she did not hesitate, because hesitating in this specific moment was the thing that killed people. The needle went in. The rush of air was immediate and audible, and Vasquez made a sound that was part pain and part relief, and his chest wall expanded slightly under Dana's palm, trying to fill the space it had just been given back. "Sat's climbing," Pettit said. 91, 93. "Good. Get me a thoracic surgeon. He's going to need a proper chest tube placed. This is a temporizing measure." She looked at Vasquez. His color was already better. His eyes were sharper. "You still with me, Danny?" "Yeah." A real breath this time, and the word had more weight behind it than anything he'd said since they'd pulled him out of the ambulance. "Yeah, I'm with you. The hard part's done for right now. Don't move around." She was already turning, because there were 30 other people incoming, and she had spent exactly as long in Bay 2 as she needed to. What happened in the next 40 minutes was the kind of thing that afterward people struggled to describe accurately, because the accurate description required holding too many parallel threads at once. It was not heroic in the cinematic sense. It was not clean or triumphant or scored with anything. It was loud, and it was bloody, and it involved a lot of shouting, and at least 2 moments where the wrong decision would have ended someone's life, and it was sustained by the specific combination of knowledge and trained reflex and tolerance for chaos that cannot be taught in a classroom. Dana moved through the department the way she had learned to move in worse environments than this. She triaged the incoming patients in the ambulance bay before they came through the doors, which was where triage should happen, and almost never did in a hospital setting because hospitals were designed for the patient to come to the care, not the other way around. She rerouted 2 patients who were headed for trauma bays that were already overwhelmed to a secondary area, a procedure room and a recovery bay that weren't officially part of the trauma system, but had the physical space and the oxygen and the monitoring capability. She identified the 3 patients in the incoming group who were beyond current intervention, given available resources, and made the call that nobody liked to make, the one that triage systems exist to make possible. Those 3 were designated expectant and placed in a quiet side room with a nurse for monitoring and comfort, because the resources they would require to have any chance were the same resources that 5 other people needed right now to definitely survive. She made that call without asking anyone. She made it without explaining herself to the residents who looked at her with the expression of people waiting for her to justify the decision. And she kept moving. Dr. Anand found her at the 40-minute mark, between the ambulance bay and Bay 4, where Dana had just finished directing the placement of a femoral pressure dressing on a patient named Marcus Webb, 28 years old, both legs intact, but a fragment wound to the upper right thigh that had nicked something important and had been bleeding steadily since before he arrived. "You need to know something," Anand said. Dana didn't stop moving. "Tell me while we walk." "Holt is upstairs. He's on the phone with the hospital administrator and with legal. He's filing an emergency complaint with the state nursing board. He wants you charged with unauthorized access to a medical record system and unauthorized clinical intervention during a mass casualty event." "Is Foss stable?" "He's in the OR. Surgery found the bleed exactly where you said it was. He's going to make it." "Good." Dana turned into Bay 3, checked the patient, blast injury, both hands bandaged, head wound being sutured by a resident who was doing fine, stable enough, and turned back. "Holt can file whatever he wants. There are 31 patients in this building right now who needed someone to organize this department in the first 20 minutes, and the people whose job that was weren't doing it." "I know that," Anand said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite an apology but was adjacent to it. "I also know that none of that matters to the legal question. It'll matter when someone asks why the mass casualty outcome at this hospital today was better than it should have been given the ratio of incoming patients to available trauma staff." Dana stopped. She looked at Anand directly. "How many have we lost?" Anand's expression shifted. "1. The tension pneumo in Bay 5. He arrested before the surgical fellow could get there. They worked him for 22 minutes. Dana absorbed that. She nodded once. How many came in critical? 11 designated as immediate. We saved 10 of 11 immediates in the first 40 minutes of a 31-patient mass casualty event with a trauma team that was not staffed for this. Write that down, Priya. Make sure someone writes that down. She turned back to the floor. It was at the 55-minute mark that the hospital's exterior changed. She was at the nursing station reviewing medication orders for the 5 patients now stabilized in the secondary treatment area when someone said, loud enough to carry across the department, "There are vehicles outside, not ambulances." The phrasing was specific, and the tone was different from the kind of announcement that accompanied another incoming casualty, and Dana looked up, and through the glass doors of the ambulance bay, she could see the parking lot beyond and what was in it. Black SU versus 4 of them, parked at angles that suggested they had not been particularly concerned with the parking lot's intended layout. And around them, men in civilian clothes that were not quite civilian, the fit, the posture, the way they moved in relation to each other. She counted 12, then 14. Some of them were on phones. 2 were looking at the building with the particular focused attention of people conducting an assessment. A man broke from the group and walked toward the entrance. He was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and he moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had spent decades making sure that every step counted. He wore a jacket over a collared shirt, and he had the kind of face that had seen enough things that it no longer defaulted to any particular expression. He came through the ambulance bay doors, and he stopped and looked at the department, and his eyes found Dana in approximately 3 seconds. He walked to her directly. "Ms. Reeves." Not a question. "Who are you?" she said. "Colonel Brant Ellison, 9th Group." He didn't offer a hand. He didn't do the preamble. "I need a status on my people." She pulled up the triage board on the terminal beside her and turned it so he could see. 31 incoming. Current status, 22 stabilized or in active treatment, 6 in surgery or prepped for surgery, 2 in the ICU on ventilators, 1 expectant who may move to stable in the next hour depending on his intracranial pressure trends. 1 deceased, Sergeant, she checked the name, Kowalski. Tension pneumothorax, arrested before surgical intervention. Ellison looked at the board. His jaw was tight. "Kowalski," he said quietly, and it landed in a specific way. Not information being processed, but a name being carried somewhere. "He was managed in the field before he came in," Dana said. "The retention happened in transit. His medic did everything right." Ellison looked at her. "I know. His medic is one of yours." She didn't understand that yet. She filed it. "What's your current resource constraint?" he asked. "Blood products. We've pulled from our bank and we've requested emergency resupply from the regional center, but we have 3 surgical patients who are going to need ongoing transfusion support, and I'm watching the count. Also staffing. I need 2 more nurses with trauma experience in the next hour, or the ratio is going to become a problem for the ICU admissions." Ellison turned and spoke to a man behind him in a voice too low for Dana to catch. The man nodded and stepped away with his phone. "Blood resupply will be here in 40 minutes, Ellison said. "I'm sending for additional medical personnel from Braxton. They'll be here within the hour." "Okay." She looked at him. "How do you know who I am?" He looked at her for a moment that was slightly longer than the question required. "Because 6 of the men in this building were in Shada province 9 years ago," he said. "And they're alive because you didn't leave." She said nothing. "I'll explain the rest later," he said. "Right now, I need to see my people. Follow me." She took him through the department, and he was quiet, and she was quiet, and the noise of the floor moved around them. He stopped at each bed, and he looked at each man and said each name, and the ones who were conscious enough to hear it reacted the same way. A steadying, a visible settling. The way people settle when they hear a voice they recognize in a place that has been disorienting and painful. At Bay 7, they stopped. The man in Bay 7 was not one of the tactical operators. He was younger, early 20s, and he was dressed in a medic's uniform with the insignia of an attached support element. His right leg was in an air splint, and his face had the clean, slightly dazed quality of someone who had received a lot of pain medication in the last hour. But his eyes were clear, and when he saw Dana, he did something she didn't expect. He tried to sit up. Hey, don't, the nurse at his bedside said. Ma'am. He was looking at Dana. Is this Dana Reeves? She stopped. Ellison looked at the young man, and something passed across his face that might have been the precursor to a complicated emotion. Yeah, Dana said. That's me. Lie back down. I'm O'Brien. I did my advanced trauma course at Braxton. He settled back onto the bed, but his eyes stayed on her. You weren't there when I did it. But there's a photograph on the wall in the training building. From Shada. You and 6 guys. The instructor who ran my course told us, he said we were learning from your syllabus, that the whole wilderness medicine protocol for the group came from what you built after that deployment. She looked at him for a moment. How's your leg? She said. Hurts. Good. That means the blood's still moving through it. She looked at the nurse. Watch for compartment syndrome in the next 6 hours. Any change in pain quality or loss of sensation, I want to know immediately. She walked out of Bay 7. In the corridor, Ellison fell into step beside her. You never came back to the group, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was observation, the way careful people make observations when they're trying to understand something. I transitioned out. Nursing was always where I was going to end up. You could have gone to a federal medical position, DOD-VA. Any of a dozen programs would have been. I know. She stopped at the nursing station and looked at the board. I wanted a regular hospital. I wanted to do regular work. She paused. It didn't stay regular. No, he said. It doesn't usually. A voice behind them. Colonel Ellison? They both turned. Dr. Marcus Holt was standing at the end of the corridor. He was not in scrubs. He'd changed into street clothes, which meant he'd either been off the floor or was preparing to leave the building. And the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had come back to execute a plan and had walked into a scene that did not resemble the plan. He was looking at Ellison, and then his eyes moved to Dana, and then back to Ellison. I need to speak with someone about the unauthorized individual currently operating in this department, Holt said. His voice had the carefully maintained control of someone who was furious and was managing it. She was terminated this morning. She has no credentials to be here. She accessed private medical records without authorization, and she has been issuing clinical directives to my staff during an active. Dr. Holt? Ellison's voice was not loud. It was the kind of voice that didn't need to be. I'm aware of what happened this morning. Then you're aware that I'm aware that a nurse identified a post-operative complication, was terminated for raising it, and then came back into this building and managed a 31-patient mass casualty event when your department's existing team structure was insufficient to do so. He let that sit for exactly 1 beat. I'm also aware that the patient she warned you about this morning is currently in your operating room having the internal bleed she described repaired. Holt's jaw moved. He was recalculating. Dana could see it. The specific reorganization that happens when someone's narrative of events runs into a version of the same events that other people have observed. That doesn't give her the legal authority to. Dr. Holt. Ellison's tone had not changed at all, which was somehow the most controlled thing about it. I have 6 men alive in this building right now who would not be alive if this department had managed this mass casualty event the way it was set up to manage it when those ambulances started arriving. I intend to find out exactly what happened here today, and I intend to make sure the right people understand it. All of it. He paused. I'd suggest you speak with your legal counsel before you file anything with the nursing board. Holt said nothing. His face had gone to a careful, managed blankness. Is there anything else? Ellison said. Holt looked at Dana one more time. The look had changed from fury to something harder to categorize. The beginning of a man realizing that the version of events he'd constructed, the one where he was the authority whose judgment had been challenged by a subordinate who didn't understand her place, was not the version that other people were going to be working from. He turned and walked away. Dana watched him go. He's not done, she said. No, Ellison agreed. He's not. Yes. An hour and 20 minutes into the mass casualty management, with the department settling into the slower, heavier rhythms of stabilized patients and post-crisis maintenance, Dana found herself at the far end of the ICU corridor for the first time since the ambulances started arriving. She had been running on the specific fuel that situations like this generated. Not adrenaline exactly, or not only adrenaline, but the complete submersion of self into function that she had always experienced during emergencies. The thinking about herself, the awareness of her own situation, had been completely offline for 90 minutes. It came back now. She was standing in a quiet section of corridor with her gloves off and her back against the wall, and she was aware, with sudden clarity, that she was exhausted, that she had been on shift for over 15 hours, that she had no badge, no official standing, no employment status at this hospital, and that there was a formal complaint with her name on it currently in transit to the state nursing board. She was also aware that in the room directly in front of her, through a glass wall, Sergeant Danny Vasquez was breathing, both lungs working. Oxygen sat at 96% on 2 liters via nasal cannula. The surgeon who'd placed his chest tube had done good work and the re-expansion was clean, and the tube was draining exactly what it should be draining. Vasquez was awake, propped slightly, looking at the ceiling with the particular peaceful blankness of someone who has recently been given good pain management and who has just survived something. He turned his head and saw her through the glass. He raised one hand, not a wave exactly, more like an acknowledgement, a registration. "You're still there." She raised her chin in response. She had not eaten since the granola bar at 4 in the morning. She had a headache building behind her left eye. Her feet hurt in the specific way that happens after hours on concrete. These were minor and irrelevant, and she noted them the way she noted all physical data, as information, not complaints. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number again. She answered. "Reeves. Ms. Reeves." A woman's voice this time, professional, carrying the specific kind of precision that came from institutional authority rather than personal confidence. "My name is Sylvia Okafor. I'm the Regional Director of the Joint Medical Oversight Board. I've been asked to contact you regarding the events at Varon General Hospital today." Dana was quiet for a moment. "By who?" "Several parties." A pause. "I want to be direct with you. We've received a formal complaint from Dr. Marcus Holt citing unauthorized record access and unsanctioned clinical intervention. We've also received, in the last 40 minutes, a separate communication from Colonel Brant Ellison at the 9th Special Operations Support Group describing a mass casualty management scenario and specifically crediting your intervention with the outcomes achieved." Another pause. "These accounts are significantly in conflict." "I know they are. I'd like to schedule a formal interview." "Ms. Okafor," Dana kept her voice even. "There are currently 22 patients in this hospital from a mass casualty event who are stable partly because of decisions made in the first 20 minutes of triage. The documentation of those decisions is in this hospital's system with timestamps. The medication records for Gerald Foss are in this system with timestamps. I'm not going anywhere. Interview me whenever you need to." She paused. "But I'd look at the timestamps before you decide which account you're crediting." A silence on the line, longer than a standard processing pause. "I will," Okafor said. "Expect my office to contact you within 24 hours." The call ended. Dana lowered the phone. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked back through the glass at Vasquez, who had gone back to looking at the ceiling. Behind her, a sound. Not footsteps exactly. The slight shift of air that happens when someone stops moving after moving. She turned. There were 4 men in the corridor, not the operators she'd been treating. These were different. Older, 2 of them. The bearing was the same, but the age lines were there. The particular weathering. All 4 were in street clothes. All 4 were looking at her. The one in front was perhaps 60. He walked with a slight list to the right that suggested an old injury to the left leg, managed and compensated for so long it had become part of his gait. His eyes were light brown and very direct, and when he looked at her there was something in it that was not assessment. He had already assessed, but recognition of a specific and personal kind. "You don't know me," he said. "My name is Aldridge. Thomas Aldridge." He stopped about 6 feet away. "I was the group sergeant major when you were in Shadow Province." She looked at him. "You were the one who ordered the retrograde," she said. It was not an accusation. It was simply accurate. "I was." He said it without flinching. "We were taking fire from 3 directions. We had 2 confirmed KIA, and the exfil window was closing. The call was—" He stopped. "The call was the right tactical call given the information I had." "I know," she said. I know you know. That's not why I'm here. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, and he took out something small and held it out to her. A photograph, slightly creased. She looked at it without taking it. 7 people. A vehicle, desert-colored, in the background. 6 men and 1 woman, all of them in tactical gear, all of them looking at the camera with the specific expression of people who have recently been through something and are standing on the other side of it. She recognized 5 of the faces from the past 90 minutes. They're all here, Aldridge said. Every one of them who's in this building today. They were in that photograph. She looked at it a moment longer. Then she looked up at him. Why are you telling me this now? Because I think you are about to go through something. His voice was level, but it was not neutral. There was something underneath it. And I think you should know exactly how many people are aware of what you did 9 years ago and what you did today, before whatever Holt is trying to do gets any further. She didn't respond immediately. You've been talking to Ellison, she said, since 20 minutes after we got word of the activation. He put the photograph back in his pocket. There are 14 people in this building right now who are going to be asked about what happened here today. All 14 of us are going to say the same thing, not because we were briefed to, because it's true. She absorbed this. She was tired enough that the information came in slightly sideways, and she had to make herself stand still with it and let it settle rather than move to the next task. I need to check on 2 patients, she said. Go, Aldridge said. We're not leaving. She pushed off the wall and walked down the corridor, and she did not look back, but she was aware of them standing there as she walked, the weight of people who had made a specific decision to be present in this particular place, and the awareness of it sat with her like the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. At the end of the corridor, she turned the corner toward the secondary treatment area, and she walked directly into Holt. He was not alone. There was a man with him she didn't recognize, suit, 50s, the institutional bearing of hospital administration, and a woman in a blazer holding a tablet who had the look of someone with a legal background. Holt looked at her the way a man looks at something he has decided is a problem he is going to solve. Ms. Reeves, the man in the suit said, I'm Richard Farrow, Chief Operating Officer of Veyron General. I need you to come with us. I have 2 patients. The patients will be managed by staff, Farrow said. I need you in my office now. We have significant legal and liability concerns that require immediate— Richard! Anand's voice came from behind Dana, sharp and clear. She had appeared from one of the side rooms, still in her scrubs, a tablet under her arm. You should know that Colonel Ellison has requested a meeting with the hospital board tonight, and the Joint Medical Oversight Board is already aware of the situation. Farrow looked at Anand, then at Dana, then at Holt, who was looking at a point on the wall that was not any of them. The meeting, Farrow said carefully, can include— It's going to include everyone, Anand said, including the time-stamped records from this morning and the triage documentation from the last 2 hours. She looked at Dana. Your 2 patients in secondary are stable. I just came from there. Dana looked at Farrow. She looked at Holt. Holt was still looking at the wall, but something had changed in him. She could see it. Not remorse, not yet, maybe not ever, but the specific collapse that happens in a person who has been holding a version of events together by sheer force of authority and who has just realized the authority is not going to be sufficient. I'll come to the meeting, Dana said to Farrow. Tell me when. She walked past all of them. At the end of the corridor, one of Ellison's men was standing with his phone in his hand, and when Dana passed, he looked up and said quietly, without any particular drama, The general's on his way. She stopped. Which general? She said. He told her. She stood in the corridor for a moment with that information and the exhaustion behind her eyes, and the sound of the hospital moving around her, ventilators and monitors, and the low voice of a nurse doing an assessment in the room nearest to her. She had not spoken to that man in 9 years. She had not expected to speak to him again. She started walking. She kept walking. The man who had told her, one of Ellison's, mid-30s, the kind of face that gave nothing away by default, fell into step beside her for approximately 4 seconds before she stopped and turned and looked at him with an expression that communicated, without any words, that she did not need an escort. He stopped. She kept walking alone. The name he'd given her was General Warren Hask. She had not said the name out loud in 9 years, not because it was classified. Most of it wasn't, not anymore, but because there were names that accumulated weight over time and that you learned to set down somewhere and not pick back up unless you had a specific reason to. Hask had been the commanding general of the theater element when she was in Shara province. He was the one who had ultimately signed off on the after-action review. He was the one who had, in a conference room at Braxton 6 weeks after she came home, sat across a table from her and asked her to walk through every decision she had made during the 47 minutes between the order to retrograde and the moment the last survivor was loaded onto the exfil bird. He had not been unkind. He had also not been warm. He had been thorough in the way that people responsible for understanding catastrophic situations had to be thorough, methodical, precise, asking the same question from 4 different angles to make sure the answer was consistent. When she had finished, he had closed his notebook and looked at her across the table and said, "What you did was not in the protocol. It also saved 6 lives. We're going to have a conversation about what that means for the protocol." She had never been invited back for that conversation. She transitioned out 8 months later. She did not know whether the conversation had happened without her, whether the protocol had changed, whether her name was attached to anything official, or whether it had simply been absorbed into the institutional memory and moved on from. Apparently it had not been moved on from. She found a bathroom at the end of the corridor, went in, ran cold water over her wrists and the back of her neck, and looked at herself in the mirror for approximately 12 seconds. She had blood on the left cuff of her scrub top, not her own, Vasquez's, from when she'd done the needle decompression and not moved back fast enough. Her hair had mostly escaped whatever she'd put it in that morning. She had the specific look of someone who had been doing difficult physical work for a very long time without stopping. She dried her hands and went back out into the corridor. The hospital's administrative floor was 3 levels up from the trauma department, separated from the clinical areas by an elevator ride and a carpeted corridor that had the disconcerting quiet of a space designed for people who made decisions rather than people who implemented them. The COO's conference room had a window that looked out over the north parking lot, a long table with 12 chairs, and currently 8 people in it when Dana arrived. Farrow, the COO, sat at the head nearest the door. Beside him was the woman with the legal background. She'd introduced herself to no one, just had her tablet open and her pen moving. Anand was there, and she looked like she hadn't eaten either. Ellison sat across from Farrow, with his jacket still on, and the expression of a man who had sat in rooms like this before and understood exactly how to take up space in them without saying much. Aldridge was at the far end of the table. 2 of Ellison's men stood near the window rather than sitting, which the room apparently did not have strong feelings about. Holt sat midway down the left side with his hands folded on the table. He had put on a jacket. He looked like a man who had spent the elevator ride deciding on an approach. The chair next to Anand was empty. Dana sat in it. Farrow looked around the table and cleared his throat. "I want to start by acknowledging, Richard." Ellison's voice was even. "Before you do that, I'd like to know if we're waiting for anyone." Farrow glanced at the door. The general indicated, "I'm here." The door opened. Warren Hask was 63. He was shorter than Dana remembered, or perhaps memory had adjusted him over time, added height to the idea of him. He wore civilian clothes, charcoal gray, and he moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had learned a long time ago not to waste motion. He had aged, but not in a way that diminished anything. The gray at his temples had gone full white. His eyes were the same, dark, direct, the kind that processed information fast and completely and did not need to signal that they were doing so. He came into the room. He looked at Ellison, at Aldridge, at Anand, and then he looked at Dana. And he stopped for a half second in the way that people stop when they arrive at the thing they actually came for. He sat down, across from her 2 seats down. "Let's not spend time on preamble," he said. "Mr. Farrow, my understanding is that this hospital terminated a nurse this morning for raising a clinical concern, that the concern was valid, and that the same nurse subsequently managed the initial phase of a mass casualty event involving personnel under my command. Is that an accurate summary of the day?" Farrow opened his mouth, closed it. Holt said, "It's significantly more complicated than—" "Dr. Holt." Hask did not raise his voice. "I'll get to you. Mr. Farrow, is that summary accurate?" A long pause. Farrow looked at his legal counsel. She made a small, careful nod. "In broad terms," Farrow said. Yes. Good. Then let's talk about the details. Hask looked at Dana. Ms. Reeves, walk me through the morning. She did. She kept it clinical and sequential because that was the version that was useful in a room like this. The version that tracked decisions and timestamps and outcomes rather than the version that tracked how it had felt to stand in a corridor and have her badge taken out of her hand. She described Foss's vital sign trend, her attempts to escalate through the proper channels, the conversation with Holt, the termination, the code, her re-entry through the ambulance bay, the medication interaction she'd identified, and what she'd told Anand. Then she described the mass casualty notification, her return, and the triage decision she'd made in the first 20 minutes. She spoke for 6 minutes without interruption. When she finished, the room was quiet. Hask looked at Holt. Dr. Holt, he said, I'd like to hear your account. Holt had clearly prepared something. You could tell by the way he drew breath before he spoke. Not a natural inhale, but a staged one. Ms. Reeves raised a concern about a post-operative patient that was, in my clinical judgment at the time, within normal parameters. My assessment was made based on my direct review at 6 a.m. and on the resident's assessment at, Your assessment was wrong, Hask said. It was not said cruelly. It was said the way someone states a fact that is load-bearing for everything else in the conversation. The patient had an internal bleed that was not identified until Ms. Reeves identified it, correct? In retrospect, not in retrospect, at 7:15 this morning, Ms. Reeves identified it. You terminated her for raising it, and 40 minutes later the patient arrested from the exact complication she described. Hask looked at him steadily. I'm not asking you to litigate the clinical judgment. I'm asking you to account for the decision to terminate an employee who turned out to be correct. Holt's jaw was tight. I terminated her for insubordination. The manner in which she raised the concern was in a corridor verbally to a superior about a patient she believed was in danger. Hask's voice was very flat. That's called advocacy. In most functional clinical environments, that's considered part of the job. The legal counsel's pen had stopped moving. Anand was looking at the table with a carefully neutral expression that Dana recognized as the face of someone trying not to show that they agreed with everything being said. Holt said nothing. Here's what I know about today, Hask said, and he shifted slightly in his chair in a way that broadened his focus to include the whole room. I know that 11 of the 31 personnel who came into this hospital today were designated immediate on arrival. I know that 10 of those 11 are alive and stable right now. I know that the standard outcome for a hospital of this size managing a 31-patient mass casualty event with existing staffing would have been considerably worse. And I know, he looked at Ellison, that 6 of the men in this building today were on an exfil in Chhara province 9 years ago when the extraction was ordered and the tactical element retrograded, and that they are alive because the person sitting at this table did not leave. The room absorbed this. Holt turned his head and looked at Dana with an expression she hadn't seen from him yet. Not fury, not calculation, something more foundational than either. She was a combat medic, he said, and the way he said it, quietly, almost to himself, suggested that he was rearranging information that he had not previously had access to. She was considerably more than that, Hask said, but we'll get to that. What came next took 40 minutes and covered things Dana had not discussed with anyone outside the military context, and the experience of having them discussed in this particular room, in front of these particular people, was something she had no prepared response for. She sat still and she listened, and she let the information move through the room without trying to manage it. Hask and Ellison together reconstructed the Chhara timeline from the tactical side. Aldridge, from the far end of the table, added the ground-level account. The fire coming from 3 positions, the 2 KIA confirmed in the first 4 minutes, the exfil window, the order to retrograde. And then what happened after. Dana had treated 3 personnel in a collapsing building under active fire. She had done it without cover, without a security element, and without reliable communication back to the retreating unit. She had managed a tension pneumothorax with improvised materials, controlled a femoral bleed on a second patient using a tourniquet improvised from equipment she stripped from one of the KIA, and carried a third patient, semi-conscious, 210 pounds, across 40 meters of exposed ground to the exfil point. She had done all of this in 47 minutes. When the helicopter finally extracted the survivors, she was the last person on the ground. When Aldridge finished, the room was very quiet. Dana was looking at the conference table. She was aware that several people in the room were looking at her, and she was aware that the awareness of being looked at was deeply uncomfortable in a way she had never successfully resolved. She had spent a significant portion of her adult life doing things that other people subsequently wanted to talk about, and the gap between doing something and having it discussed had never narrowed. Ms. Reeves, Farrow's voice had changed. The administrative cadence was still there, but something else had entered it. Caution, maybe, or the beginning of recalibration. I want to be clear that the hospital's actions this morning were— I know what they were, Dana said. We will, of course, be rescinding the termination immediately, and— Richard, Hask looked at him. Let's not do the provisional language in front of everyone. The rescission is happening. The question is, what else is happening? He looked at Farrow directly. Dr. Holt filed a complaint with the state nursing board this morning. That needs to be withdrawn. Holt's legal representation started to say something. It will be, Holt said. Everyone looked at him. He was looking at Dana. His hands were still folded on the table, but the quality of stillness in him was different from how it had been at the beginning of the meeting. He did not look like a man holding a position anymore. He looked like a man sitting with something he had not finished processing. I'll withdraw it, he said. Today. Dana looked at him. She had expected a fight. She had expected to sit in this room for 2 hours while institutional machinery ran its slow course. She had not expected Holt to fold in the middle of the table because of 40 minutes of testimony about something that happened in a province he had never heard of. She was not sure what to do with that, so she filed it. There are additional matters, Anand said carefully. She looked at Farrow. The complaint Holt filed is the urgent item, but the termination itself and the circumstances around it are going to require a formal review. The documentation in Foss's chart, the timestamps on the escalation attempts, the sequence of events, all of that is going to be scrutinized. We know, Farrow said, with the tone of someone who had already identified the problem and had not yet identified the solution. I want to be part of that review, Anand said. Formally, as a witness to the corridor conversation. Farrow looked at her. You were present? Far end of the corridor, close enough. She met his eyes. And I want that on record before the review starts. This was new. Dana looked at Anand, and Anand looked back. And there was something in the exchange that was not quite an apology and not quite solidarity, but was somewhere between the two. The acknowledgement of a person who had looked away once and had decided not to look away again. Fine, Farrow said. Priya, you'll be included in the formal review process. He looked around the table. I think we should— Dana's phone buzzed on the table in front of her. She looked at the screen. ICU. She picked it up. Reeves. Ms. Reeves, this is Ewan on the ICU floor. I have a patient, one of the operators from today, Sergeant First Class Torres, Bay 1, the bilateral lower extremity we brought in at the start. He's been stable, but his pressure dropped 7 minutes ago, and it's not coming back up. His surgeon is in the OR with the chest patient, and I cannot reach the fellow. His SAT is still okay, but his MAP is 61 and going. What's his urine output for the last hour? A pause. Papers. 12 milliliters. That was wrong. That was badly wrong for a post-resuscitation patient who'd been given the fluid volume Torres had received. Have you sent a repeat hemoglobin? Just sent it. Not back yet. Get 2 units of PRBCs from the blood bank and have them at the bedside before the result comes back. Don't wait for it. And get me a repeat abdominal ultrasound at the bedside right now. I want to know if there's free fluid. You want me to order the blood without the— Yes. If I'm wrong about the hemoglobin, you stop the transfusion. If you wait for the result and I'm right, he bleeds out before the blood arrives. Order it. Okay, yes. I'm coming up. She ended the call and pushed back her chair. The room was watching her. I need to go, she said, and the statement required no explanation because the call had been on speaker volume and everyone in the room had heard it. Hask said, Go. She went. Yeah. Torres was deteriorating in the specific quiet way that post-op hemorrhage presented. Not dramatically, not with the sudden crash that the monitor alarms were built for, but in the incremental trending that required someone to look at the whole picture simultaneously and understand what direction it was moving. When Dana arrived at his bedside, his color had shifted slightly, the subtle ashen quality she'd been watching for all morning in different patients. He was conscious but moving in that slightly underwater way that indicated his brain was getting less oxygen than it wanted. "Torres," she put her hand on his forearm. "Stay with me. Look at me." "I'm here." His voice was rough. "What's happening?" "Your blood pressure dropped. We're figuring out why right now." "Is it bad?" "I don't know yet. Keep looking at me." The ultrasound machine arrived. A resident named Gaffney pushed it in, looking young and specifically anxious, and Dana took the probe and applied gel and ran it over Torres's abdomen herself because she needed the information faster than she could get it by explaining what to look for to someone who was going to be careful about it. She found the free fluid in 40 seconds. Left upper quadrant, Morrison's pouch, a dark crescent of fluid that shouldn't have been there. She moved the probe, more below the spleen. "He's re-bleeding," she said to Gaffney. "Get me the surgeon on call, whoever is available. I don't care whose patient this is. Get me the OR coordinator and tell them I need a room, right now." She looked at Ewan, the nurse who was hanging the first unit of PRBCs. "Good. Keep that going. He needs the volume while we get him upstairs." Gaffney was on the phone. Ewan was moving. The monitors were alarming in the steady, meaningless way monitors alarmed when a number crossed a threshold, and Dana silenced the alarm because the alarm was telling her something she already knew. "Torres," she looked at him directly. "I need you to stay awake." "I'm trying." A pause. His breathing was slightly faster than she liked. "You're Reeves." "Yeah. Vasquez told me." Another pause. "He said, you came back after they fired you." "Don't worry about that." "I'm not worried." He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. "Just thanks for coming back." She did not answer that. She checked his pulse, still palpable, faster than it should be, weaker than an hour ago, and looked at the PRBCs and watched the drip rate and did the math. "How long for the OR?" she said to Gaffney. 7 minutes. Room 2 is coming open." "We don't have 7 minutes to wait. We move now and they finish prepping while we're in transit." She looked at Ewan. "Call the elevator. Manual hold. Tell them it's a hemorrhagic emergency." They moved. The corridor to the surgical elevator was 60 feet, and they covered it in a controlled run. The stretcher, the PRBC bag on the pole, the monitor on the bracket, Ewan squeezing the fluid bag to push volume faster, Gaffney on the phone still trying to raise the surgeon. Dana was at the head of the stretcher with one hand on Torres's shoulder and one eye on his face, and one part of her brain doing the calculation of how much blood he had left and how fast he was losing it. She had done this before. Not in these shoes, not with this much fluorescent light, not with carpet giving way to linoleum and a set of elevator doors opening at the end of a clean hospital corridor. But the fundamental geometry was the same. The elevator opened. They got in. Torres looked up at her from the stretcher. 9 years ago, he said. His voice was slow, slightly slurred from the low pressure. "Shada, you were there?" She looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "Vasquez said you ran toward them." He was looking at the ceiling of the elevator. "Under fire." "Vasquez talks too much." "He said you carried Hernandez across 40 meters. A long breath in. "Under fire." The elevator opened on the surgical floor. "Don't pass out," she said, and they came out of the elevator at pace and turned left toward OR2, and the surgical coordinator was already there in the corridor, and Dana could see through the small window in the OR door that the room was being set up fast, still being set up, not ready, and she made the decision that the room was going to have to catch up to them rather than the other way around. "We're going in," she said. "The surgeon isn't... Who do you have available?" "Dr. Rice is... Get Rice in that room." She pushed through the OR door, and the room absorbed the stretcher and began reorganizing itself around the patient the way OR rooms did when the need was sufficiently urgent that protocol gave way to necessity. Gaffney was still on the phone. The scrub tech was moving. The circulator was calling Rice on the overhead. Torres's blood pressure read 64/40 on the transport monitor. Dana leaned over the stretcher. His eyes were still open. Barely. You're in the OR, she told him. They're going to put you under and fix the bleed. When you wake up, it'll be over. He looked at her with the specific quality of attention that people had when they were working hard to stay conscious and knew it. You're not going anywhere? He said. She was not a surgeon. She had no role in the OR once the surgical team took over. She would be standing in a corridor waiting the way she had been standing in corridors waiting all day. I'll be outside, she said. He closed his eyes. Reese came through the OR door with his mask around his neck and his hands already up. And Dana stepped back and the surgical team converged on the stretcher and the room's attention shifted away from her and onto the patient with the complete totality of a room that now knew what it was doing. She stepped out. The corridor outside OR2 was empty and quiet, the specific quiet of surgical floors where the noise happened inside rooms and the hallways existed only as transit. She leaned against the wall across from the door. She could hear, muffled through it, the sounds of the team working. The ventilator being connected, the cautery unit powering up, voices rapid and close. She was aware that her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear. The operational phase that generated adrenaline was over. From fatigue, from the physical reality of 17 hours on her feet without real food, doing work that demanded total concentration. Her body was presenting a bill that she had been postponing all day. She breathed through it. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Farrow wants you back in the conference room when you're clear. Hask is still here. She texted back. In surgical corridor, OR2. Give me 20 minutes. Another buzz. Immediate. Take the time you need. She looked at the OR door, looked at the floor, looked at her hands, which had steadied. Down the corridor, the elevator doors opened. She expected Ellison's men, or Anand, or someone from the administrative meeting following up on the operational situation. It was not any of those people. It was a man she had never seen before. 50s, civilian clothes, but carrying a camera bag and a press credential on a lanyard around his neck. He was moving fast, already looking at his phone, already talking to someone in his ear, and behind him was a woman with a microphone and a second man with a shoulder camera, and they were clearly looking for something specific. And Dana recognized the specific, purposeful trajectory of people who had been told something was here and had come to find it. She stepped away from the wall. This is a surgical floor, she said. You can't be up here. The man with the credentials looked up, looked at her scrubs, looked past her at the OR2 door. We're looking for Colonel Ellison. We have it on record that the 9th Group had personnel injured today, and media access to this floor is not authorized. You need to go back to the main entrance and go through the public affairs office. We have a source who says there's a story here. There are patients here. She kept her voice flat. That's what's here. I need you to turn around. The woman with the microphone stepped forward slightly. Are you a nurse? Were you involved in the treatment of the injured personnel today? Dana looked at her. I'm asking you to leave the surgical floor. The cameraman was already raising his camera. Is it true that the hospital fired a nurse this morning who had predicted a patient complication that the elevator at the end of the corridor opened? Hask came out of it alone. He took in the scene in approximately 1 second. The media crew. Dana standing between them and the OR, the camera that was now filming both of them. He walked forward and placed himself beside Dana without hesitation, shoulder to shoulder, and looked at the reporter. You are on a restricted hospital floor, he said, in the voice of a man who had spent 40 years making people understand that what he was saying was the last time he intended to say it. You will go back to the elevator, now. The reporter looked at him, read the posture, the voice, the complete absence of negotiability. They went. When the elevator closed, Hask looked at Dana. You all right? Torres is in surgery. He was re-bleeding. I know. Ellison told me. A pause. How bad? Free fluid in 2 quadrants. They caught it. Rice is good. She looked at the OR door. He's going to make it. Hask nodded. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he'd been quiet in that conference room 9 years ago. Not the absence of thought, but thought that had moved past the point where it needed to be spoken. The press is going to be a problem, he said. Someone in the building talked. Someone always does. He looked at the elevator doors. The story they're going to get is going to be partial. A fired nurse, a mass casualty event, military personnel involved. They're going to fill in whatever they don't have access to. I know. I want you to understand something before that starts. He turned and looked at her directly. What happened in Shada? The after-action report? My review? The outcome? There were things that should have happened that didn't. Commendations that should have been filed. I signed off on a recommendation that went up the chain and stopped moving, and I did not push hard enough on why it stopped. He paused. That was a failure of my oversight, and I've been aware of it for 9 years. Dana looked at him. There were things she could have said to that. She had thought of some of them over the years, in the specific idle moments when the past surfaced unprompted. She had rehearsed versions of this conversation without knowing she was doing it. Why are you telling me this now? She said. Because what's about to happen in this hospital is going to put your name in public record in a way that has nothing to do with what you actually did, and I think you should have the full picture before it does. He looked at the floor briefly, then back at her. There's a citation. It was drafted and submitted, and it didn't get processed correctly. I've been in contact with the records office since this morning. It's going to be corrected. The sound from inside OR2 shifted. The specific change in pitch and movement that indicated a procedure moving from crisis management into controlled surgical territory. She had learned to read those sounds the way other people read faces. Torres is going to be okay, she said, mostly to herself. Good. Hask was quiet for a moment. The board meeting is at 8. Farrow is going to present the day's events. Holt will be there. I'll be there. Ellison, the oversight board representative. He looked at her. You should be there too. I don't have a badge. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a temporary visitor credential. He held it out. She looked at it, then at him. Where did you get that? Farrow's assistant, an hour ago. She took it. She looked at it. Her name, printed cleanly, visitor. Administrative access, a red border that indicated non-clinical status. She clipped it to her scrub-top pocket where her actual badge had been until 9 hours ago. 8 o'clock, she said. 8 o'clock. He started for the elevator and then stopped. The reporters are going to find the story with or without our cooperation. I'd rather they find the right version. He looked at her over his shoulder. I think you would too. The elevator opened. He got in. Dana turned back to the OR2 door. She could hear the procedure settling into its longer phase, controlled, methodical, the sustained work of repair rather than the frantic work of stabilization. Rice was good. The team was good. Torres was going to wake up. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Anand. A text, short. Foss is out of surgery, stable. His wife is in the waiting room asking questions. I told her a nurse identified the complication. She wants to talk to whoever that is. Dana read it twice. Then, below that, a second text from Anand, 2 minutes later, that had clearly been sent after some consideration. Also, Holt asked me something after you left the conference room. He asked what your background was before nursing. I didn't answer him. I thought you should know, he asked. Dana stood in the corridor with the phone in her hand. Holt, asking about her background. After sitting through 40 minutes of Hask and Ellison and Aldridge, after the withdrawal of the complaint, the visible recalculation, the silence that had settled over him in the conference room when the Shada account had been laid out, she thought about what that meant. Not the version of events where Holt was simply recalculating risk and self-interest, though that was certainly part of it. The other version. The version where a man who had built his entire professional identity on being the most capable person in any clinical room was sitting somewhere in this building right now trying to accommodate the information that the person he'd fired for insubordination had, 9 years ago, run toward enemy fire and carried a 200-pound man across open ground and refused to leave. She was still thinking about it when the door to OR2 opened. Not all the way, just enough for Rice to step partway through and look at her with his mask still up. You the one who caught the rebleed, he said. Ultrasound at the bedside, free fluid in 2 quadrants. Good catch, he paused. He's stable, bleeding controlled. We found the source, small arterial bleeder near the surgical repair from the initial trauma. Should have been caught before he left the first OR, but he stopped himself. He's going to be fine. Hour and a half to close, and he's going to ICU. Thank you. Rice nodded and went back in. Dana exhaled. She turned and walked toward the elevator. She pressed the button and waited and looked at the temporary badge clipped to her pocket. Her name, in clean black print, where her real badge had been this morning when Holt had taken it out of her hand. The elevator opened. She stepped in. And her phone rang. Not a text, a call, unknown number, different area code from any of the calls she'd received today, a code she recognized after a moment as Federal, Washington, D.C. And when she answered it, the voice on the other end was a woman, professional and precise, who said, "Miss Reeves, I'm calling from the office of the Secretary of Defense. We've been made aware of the events at Veyron General Hospital today, and we'd like to discuss—" The elevator doors closed. The elevator was moving, and the woman from the Secretary of Defense's office was still talking. And Dana stood in the small metal box of it with the phone pressed against her ear and the temporary badge on her chest, and the particular quality of stillness she defaulted to when information arrived faster than context could organize it. The woman's name was Dorland. She spoke the way people spoke when they had been trained to communicate official positions without committing to them before the appropriate moment. Measured, professional, each sentence placed with care. She said that the office had been briefed on the day's events by General Hask. She said that there were several matters requiring formal follow-up. She used the phrase matters of commendation and record correction twice, which told Dana that Hask had moved faster than she'd expected. "I understand there's a board meeting at the hospital tonight," Dorland said. 8 o'clock, Dana said. "We'll be in contact with you before that meeting." A pause. "Ms. Reeves, I want to be clear. This call is informational. Nothing is being decided tonight. But the office wanted you to know that we're aware of the situation and that the appropriate people are paying attention." Dana said, "I appreciate that." She meant it in the specific, minimal way that people meant things when they weren't sure yet what those things were going to amount to. The elevator opened on the second floor. She stepped out and the call ended, and she stood in the corridor for a moment with the phone in her hand and the sound of the hospital around her. A different quality of sound on this floor, less acute, the measured activity of a general ward rather than the compressed urgency of the trauma department below. She needed to eat something. She recognized this the way she recognized most physiological imperatives during operational periods, as a data point, noted, deferred until the window allowed. The window was now, briefly. She found the staff lounge at the end of the corridor, which she knew from 3 years of institutional geography, and she went in. The room was empty. There was a vending machine against the far wall, and she bought a bag of crackers and a small bottle of apple juice, and she sat in one of the chairs at the small table, and she ate the crackers without tasting them, and drank the juice and looked at the wall. She had been awake for nearly 18 hours. She had been fired, re-entered the building twice without authorization, identified 2 life-threatening conditions that had been missed, managed the intake phase of a 31-patient mass casualty event, saved 1 man from a tension pneumothorax retention and another from a surgical rebleed. She had sat in a meeting with a 2-star general and a hospital COO and the man who had ordered the retrograde in Chara province. She had received a phone call from the office of the Secretary of Defense, and Marcus Holt was still somewhere in this building. She finished the crackers. She drank the rest of the juice. She looked at the clock on the wall. 6:47 p.m. An hour and 13 minutes to the board meeting. She took out her phone and called Anand. "Where are you?" Dana said. "Second floor break room," ironically. "I'm in the staff lounge on 2. A pause. "Give me 3 minutes." Anand arrived with 2 cups of coffee from the nursing station and the expression of someone who had been carrying something all day and was preparing to set it down. She sat across from Dana and pushed 1 cup across the table and wrapped both hands around her own. "Foss's wife found me," Anand said. She was very emotional. She kept asking who the nurse was. I told her I couldn't give personal information, but that the nurse had done everything right. "How is he?" "Out of recovery. He's going to have a rough few weeks, but he's going to be fine." Anand looked at her coffee. "He's 53. His wife is 51. They have 2 kids in college." She paused. "He would have died this morning." Dana said nothing. "I should have backed you up in that corridor," Anand said. It came out without preamble, which suggested she had been building toward it all day. "When Holt called security, I was standing right there. I watched, and I didn't say anything. You escalated through Holt afterward, after you'd already been escorted out." Anand looked at her. "That's not the same thing, and we both know it." Dana looked at her coffee. The fluorescent light in the lounge had a slight flicker she hadn't noticed the first time she'd walked in, a subtle irregularity in the tube at the far end. "You're the one who told me to come back for the MCI," Dana said. "You already knew about it, from the dispatch call. You confirmed the activation, you put me on the board." Dana picked up the coffee. "That mattered." Anand was quiet for a moment. "It doesn't fully cover what I didn't do earlier." "No," Dana agreed. "It doesn't." It sat between them without either of them trying to resolve it, which was, Dana thought, the appropriate relationship to have with it. "What's going to happen tonight?" Anand asked. Farrow presents the day to the board. Hask is there. Ellison, the oversight board director. Dana looked at the clock. "They'll review the documentation, timestamps on the chart entries, the termination record, the MCI triage log. The complaint Holt filed is being withdrawn. He told me that himself. About an hour ago." Anand's voice had a quality Dana couldn't immediately categorize. "He came and found me. He asked about your background. I said I didn't know." She looked at Dana directly. "He looked like someone had taken the floor out from under him. I noticed. He's not a bad surgeon." "I know he's not. He's a terrible manager of anyone who knows something he doesn't." Anand paused. "Which is a significant problem when you're running a surgical department." Dana said nothing. "The board is going to have to act on that," Anand said. "Not just on today. There's a pattern. Carol Dix told me this afternoon that she's going to submit a formal statement about the transfer requests from the last 18 months, the 2 charge nurses who left. This was new information. Dana absorbed it. "Is she?" Dana said. "She said she's been sitting on it. She said today made it feel more urgent." Anand looked at her coffee again. "I think other people are going to do the same thing. Once the meeting starts and the board sees the full scope of today, I think more people are going to come forward about the pattern." The lounge was very quiet. The flickering tube light made its small, intermittent statement. "Holt may not know that yet," Dana said. "No," Anand said. "He doesn't." She had 40 minutes before the board meeting, and she used 20 of them standing outside the ICU, looking through the glass at the room where Danny Vasquez was awake, and watching something on the small mounted television with the sound turned low. His color was normal now, genuinely normal, not the managed near normal of someone being propped up by volume replacement. His O2 sat read 97 on room air. The chest tube was still in place, but draining minimal output, which was what it should be doing at this stage. He looked over and saw her through the glass and reached for the remote and turned off the television. She pushed the door open. "You should be resting," she said. "I was." He looked at her with clear eyes. "How'd Torres do?" "Out of surgery, stable. He'll be in ICU by morning." Vasquez let out a long breath. "He's stubborn. I knew he'd be okay." "The surgery helped." "Yeah, well." He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Reeves." He brought his eyes back to her. "What's happening with the hospital? With the guy who fired you?" "There's a board meeting in 40 minutes. And I don't know yet." He was quiet for a moment. "Ellison told us what you said in the meeting, about the timestamps, about the triage documentation." He shifted slightly in the bed. "He also told us you didn't ask for any of this, the Shada stuff coming out, the general being here." "I didn't." "You would have just, what, gone home and filed an appeal or something?" She looked at him. "I would have found another hospital." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. That's you." He looked at the window, at the ICU floor beyond it. "There were guys in my unit who told stories about Shada, about the medic who didn't leave. I didn't connect it when I came in. I was pretty out of it." A pause. "I connected it when you told me your name in the ambulance bay." "You didn't say anything." "I was trying not to pass out." He looked at her. "I would have asked for you specifically if I'd known you were here. We all would have." She said, "You're going to need 6 to 8 weeks on the chest. No strenuous activity. The re-expansion is good, but the lung tissue needs time." Changing the subject. "Being a nurse." He smiled at that. It was a real smile. A little lopsided. The pain medication taking the edge off one side of his face. "Okay," he said. 6 to 8 weeks. And no arguing with whoever does your follow-up." "I'll try." She looked at him for a moment. There were things about this specific situation, about being here in this specific hospital with this specific collection of people, that were not comfortable to think about directly. The proximity of accident and outcome, the particular geometry of the morning, Holt in the corridor, the badge in his palm, the elevator down to the parking structure, the PA code, blue filtering down through concrete. 4 minutes. The difference between what happened and what could have happened was 4 minutes and the decision to drive back. She didn't say any of that. "Get some sleep," she said. She left. The conference room on the administrative floor had been reconfigured since the afternoon meeting. More chairs, a projection screen at the far end that hadn't been there before, a setup on the table that suggested someone had requested a formal presentation rather than a conversation. There were already 11 people in the room when Dana arrived at 7:58, and more filing in behind her. She recognized most of them. Farrow at the head of the table with 2 board members she hadn't met. A woman in her 60s named Lester, who had the bearing of someone who had chaired difficult meetings before and was prepared to do it again. And a man in his 50s named Chow, who was reviewing documents with the focused expression of a person doing actual preparation rather than performing it. Hask and Ellison sat together on one side. Aldridge was present again, which she had not expected. Anand was at the far end. Carol Dix had come, sitting very straight in her chair, a folder in front of her that she had clearly prepared. Sylvia Okafor from the Joint Medical Oversight Board was present. She had called ahead. Dana had not expected to see her in person. The legal counsel from the afternoon was at a side table with her laptop, and Holt was there. He sat midway down the right side of the table, and the thing that struck Dana when she looked at him was the specific quality of isolation around him. Not physical isolation, people were on either side, but the kind that accumulates when the room's understanding of a situation has reorganized itself and left one person in a different position than they'd been in when the day started. He was looking at the table. He looked up when Dana came in. He looked back down. She sat on the opposite side from him, between Anand and a board member she didn't know. Lester called the meeting to order at exactly 8 o'clock, which told Dana something about her. Farrow presented first, and he was careful, more careful than he'd been in the afternoon meeting, which meant someone with legal training had gotten to him in the intervening hours. He laid out the timeline of the morning in the specific neutral language of institutional documentation. A nursing staff member had raised a clinical concern. A clinical authority had made a judgment call. The staff member had been terminated. The patient had required emergency intervention. The staff member had re-entered the facility. He did not use the word insubordination. He did not use the phrase unauthorized access. He used raised a clinical concern and re-entered the facility and provided assistance during an MCI event in the flat, colorless language of someone who had decided that the narrative needed to be sanitized of Holt's vocabulary before the board reviewed it. Holt noticed. Dana watched him notice. Then Okafor spoke. She had the documentation that Dana had referenced on the phone, the timestamps. She put them on the screen. 0710. Nursing chart entry. Flagging vital sign trend and requesting physician review. 0714. Page to resident on call. 0731. Resident assessment documented. Concern noted as within normal parameters. 0743. Nursing re-entry to chart. Updated vital signs. Second flag. 0748. Nursing supervisor notified. 0752. Clinical escalation to attending surgical staff. 0754. Termination documented. 0821. Code blue. ICU. Room 7. The timestamps on the screen were not arguments. They were not opinions. They were the recorded sequence of events, and they told a story that required no interpretation. The room was very quiet. The interval between Ms. Reeves's clinical escalation and the patient's code event, Okafor said, was 27 minutes. The interval between the escalation and the termination was 2 minutes. She paused. I want to be clear that the Oversight Board is not here to render a clinical judgment on Dr. Holt's assessment of the patient at 6 a.m. We are here to examine the institutional response to a nursing escalation. Lester looked at Holt. Dr. Holt, do you have anything to add to the account Mr. Farrow presented? Holt had been looking at the timestamps on the screen. He looked at Lester. I made a clinical judgment that turned out to be incorrect, he said. His voice was controlled and even. I've acknowledged that. The patient was treated successfully and is recovering. A pause. I also made a personnel decision in a manner that I would do differently now, with more information. Would do differently, Lester repeated. Yes. The complaint you filed with the state nursing board this morning, Lester said, against Miss Reeves, it's been withdrawn? Yes, this afternoon. Before or after General Hask arrived at this hospital? A pause. After, Holt said. Lester made a note. She looked at Okafor. Is the oversight board satisfied with the withdrawal, or are there independent grounds for review? The board is conducting its own review regardless of the complaint status, Okafor said. The withdrawal affects the complaint track. It doesn't affect our independent assessment of the institutional response to the escalation. Holt's jaw tightened. He had understood, Dana thought, that withdrawing the complaint would close that particular door. He had not fully anticipated that other doors would remain open. Carol Dix spoke up from the end of the table. I'd like to submit a formal statement, she said. Her voice was steady, if slightly effortful. Regarding the pattern of responses to nursing escalations in this department over the past 2 years. Farrow looked at her. Carol, I have documentation, she said. She opened the folder and pushed it toward the board member nearest her. 2 charge nurses who submitted transfer requests in the last 18 months, both of whom cited Dr. Holt's management style as a contributing factor, 1 formal complaint that was filed and not acted on, and my own direct observations from this morning's corridor interaction, which I am prepared to detail on record. The legal counsel at the side table was typing without looking up. Holt was looking at Carol Dix with an expression Dana had not seen from him yet. Not fury, not calculation. Something less organized than either, the expression of a man watching a version of events he thought he had managed reassemble itself from directions he hadn't covered. Lester looked at him. Dr. Holt, I want to give you the opportunity to respond before we go further. Holt was quiet for a moment, and then, rather than responding to Carol Dix's statement, he turned his head and looked at Dana. Ms. Reeves, he said. The room shifted slightly. Several people looked between them. I owe you a direct apology, Holt said. Not a procedural one. Not one conditioned on the board meeting, or the oversight review, or any of the rest of this. He paused. I was wrong about the patient. I was wrong about the escalation. And the manner in which I handled both of those things caused direct harm to you professionally and could have caused direct harm to Mr. Foss. Another pause. I'm sorry. The room was very still. Dana looked at him. She had expected many possible configurations of this evening, and she had spent no time expecting this one. Marcus Holt, in front of a board and a 2-star general and an oversight director, saying the specific words without hedging them with process language or conditional framing. I heard you, she said. It was not forgiveness. It was not the absence of forgiveness either. It was acknowledgement, which was the appropriate and honest response, and it landed in the room accordingly. Lester let it sit for a moment. Then she looked at Farrow. The rescission of termination. Effective immediately, Farrow said, with full restoration of seniority and compensation for the period of termination. And the nursing board filing. I want independent verification from the board's administrative office that the withdrawal has been processed, not just submitted. I'll have that by 9 a.m., Okafor said. Lester made another note. She looked around the table. The question of Dr. Holt's continued role in this department is a separate matter from the immediate items. It requires a review process that this board will conduct over the following 30 days. She looked at Holt. During that period, Dr. Holt, you will continue in your clinical role under a modified supervisory structure. You will not have unilateral authority over personnel decisions. All nursing escalations in your cases will be reviewed by a second attending. She looked at Farrow. Is that clear and achievable from an operational standpoint? Yes, Farrow said. Then that's the interim measure. Lester looked at her documents. We have one more item. She looked at Hask. What happened in the next 20 minutes was something Dana had not been told about in advance, and she understood afterward that this had been intentional, that Hask and Ellison and probably Dorland's office had made the calculation that telling her ahead of time would have caused her to object, which she would have, Hask presented the Shada account to the board. Not the summary version from the afternoon, the documented version, with the after-action report excerpts and the medical record of the 3 operators she had treated and the assessment written by the military surgeon who had examined them after extraction and documented his findings. That the intervention in the field was consistent with advanced combat trauma management under fire. That the outcomes in all 3 cases were directly attributable to timely and technically correct care. That without intervention within the window in which it was provided, all 3 operators would not have survived to extraction. Then he presented a second document. This is a citation that was submitted in September of 9 years ago and was not processed correctly due to an administrative failure in the records chain, Hask said. I became aware of the failure approximately 7 years ago. I did not act on it with sufficient urgency, which I have acknowledged to Ms. Reeves directly. With the assistance of the records office and the secretary's office, that failure has been corrected. He put the document on the screen. Dana read it. She read it twice. It had her name on it, and it had language she recognized as the formal language of the relevant commendation, and it had a signature at the bottom that she recognized without having expected to ever see it again on anything related to her. She sat with it. Anand, beside her, had gone very still. Dana was aware of this without looking at her. Ellison spoke from across the table. Ms. Reeves rendered care under direct enemy fire without a security element to 3 critically wounded personnel. She did so after an authorized retrograde had been ordered, without being directed to, and without any expectation of extraction for herself. All 3 personnel she treated survived. She was the last person aboard the exfil aircraft. The board members were looking at the screen, looking at Dana, Lester said carefully, and this was not recognized at the time. It was not processed at the time, Hask said. That is being corrected. Lester looked at Dana. Ms. Reeves, is there anything you'd like to say? There were things she could have said. She had a complicated relationship with the idea of saying them in this room, in front of these people, with the document on the screen and Holt sitting on the other side of the table and the sound of the hospital moving around them. The 3 operators I treated that night are here in this building, she said. They're going to be okay. She paused. That's what I'd like to say. Lester looked at her for a moment longer than the pause required. Noted, she said, and she meant it in a way that went past the procedural use of the word. The meeting continued. There were administrative items, the formal rescission documentation, the terms of the oversight review, the timeline for Okafor's independent assessment. Dana participated where she was required to and was quiet where she wasn't, and she watched the room do the work that rooms like this existed to do, slowly, with effort, with the friction of institutional process, but moving in the right direction. At 9:47, Lester called a recess for the board members to confer privately. The room began to move. People stood, gathered papers, moved toward the door, or toward each other in the small clusters that formed after high-pressure meetings. Dana stayed in her chair for a moment. Holt stood. He looked across the table at her, and he didn't say anything, because what needed to be said had been said, and both of them knew it. He nodded once, which was not apology again. That had already been given, but was something else. Acknowledgement of a new order of things. He walked out. Dana watched him go. Anand sat down beside her again. She'd stood up when the recess was called, and now she was back, and she had the particular expression of someone who had just witnessed something they weren't sure they had the language for. The commendation, Anand said. Yeah. Why didn't you... when it wasn't processed, did you know? I knew it had been submitted. I found out a few years later that it hadn't gone through. Dana looked at the doorway where Holt had just been. I figured it wasn't worth fighting. I was out. I was doing something else. The people who mattered knew what happened. The people who mattered knew, Anand repeated. Yeah. And you were okay with that? Dana thought about how to answer that honestly. I wasn't okay or not okay with it, she said. It just was what it was. Fighting about it wouldn't have changed what happened. Anand was quiet for a moment, then, you know the press is going to have most of this by morning. I know. How do you feel about that? Dana looked at the projection screen, which had gone dark after the last document was removed. The room reflected in it dimly. The chairs, the overhead lights, the shapes of people moving. I feel like I need to sleep for about 12 hours, she said. Anand almost smiled. That's fair. Hask appeared at the conference room door. He looked at Dana and gestured, the minimum efficient gesture of someone who needed her attention for a moment, and she stood and excused herself and followed him into the corridor. He was holding his phone. He showed it to her. A text from Dorland's office. Formal commendation processing confirmed. Administrative correction complete. Public record updated, effective the following morning. She looked at it. I know you didn't ask for this, Hask said. No. I know you weren't going to. He put his phone in his pocket. But it was the right thing to correct, regardless of today. He looked at her steadily. Whatever happens with the hospital board, and I think you know which direction it's going, this was separate from that. What was owed to you didn't stop being owed because you found another way forward. She looked at him. There was something she had been carrying for 9 years that she recognized now primarily by the fact that it was lighter than it had been this morning. She couldn't have named it precisely. She wasn't sure she needed to. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He started back toward the conference room and then stopped. One more thing, he said, and his voice had a different quality, slightly careful. The way people sounded when they were introducing information they weren't entirely sure how to frame. The 30-day review of Dr. Holt's role. Farrow asked me informally before the meeting. He asked whether I thought the hospital would benefit from restructuring the emergency and trauma training program. Dana looked at him. What did you tell him? She said. I told him I thought it would, and I told him I had a specific person in mind who might be interested in leading it. He paused. If that person was interested. The corridor was quiet. A nurse passed at the far end without looking at them. The hospital continued its nighttime rhythms. Slower, lower, the particular register of a building that had been through an enormous amount of activity and was now managing its aftermath. Dana did not answer immediately. She was thinking about Vasquez in the ICU, Torres in surgery. The 11 operators who had come in as immediate priorities and the 10 of them who were alive. Gerald Foss in recovery. The timestamps on Okafor's screen, 0710, 0714, 0752, 0754, 0821. The corridor this morning, the badge in Holt's palm, the elevator descending. She was thinking about what it meant to want a regular hospital doing regular work, and whether the day sheet had constituted evidence for or against the idea that such a thing was possible for her. She was thinking about the training building at Braxton, and the photograph on the wall that O'Brien had described, and the protocol that apparently bore her name now, built from what she'd done in 47 minutes of darkness and fire. She was thinking about what Hask had said 9 years ago at the end of that conference room debrief. We're going to have a conversation about what that means for the protocol. I'll think about it, she said. Hask nodded. He went back into the conference room. Dana stood in the corridor. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it automatically. It was not Anand. It was not Okafor. It was not Dorland's office. It was a number she did not recognize, local, and when she opened the message, it was not a text. It was an image. She looked at it for a long moment. It was a photograph. Not the one from Aldridge's pocket, a different one. Newer. It had clearly been taken today, in this hospital, with a phone camera. The angle suggested it had been taken from a distance, through a window or a partially open door, without the subject's knowledge. The subject was Dana, in the ambulance bay 3 hours ago. Beneath the photograph, a message. You should know what's already been sent to 3 separate news desks. The filing with the nursing board was just the beginning. There are people who will make sure the right version of today gets told. She read it twice. She looked at the image. The timestamp in the corner of the photo read 4:22 p.m. During the mass casualty management, when she had been in the ambulance bay doing triage. Whoever had sent this had been in or near the ambulance bay this afternoon and had photographed her without her knowledge and had held on to it until now. Not the press. The press had been turned away from the surgical floor. They hadn't had access to the ambulance bay during active operations. Someone inside the hospital. She looked at the number, local, unknown to her. She looked at the message again, the right version of today, and she thought about what that phrase meant and whose version it was, and who would benefit from a version of events that started somewhere other than 0710 on the chart and the timestamp on the termination record. She was still standing in the corridor with her phone in her hand when the conference room door opened and Pharaoh came out. Behind him, 2 board members, then Okafor, then Anand, and behind Anand, Holt. He was putting on his jacket. He looked at Dana in the corridor as he came through the door, and the look was the same recalibrated, slightly flattened look he'd had for the last several hours. Then his eyes went to her phone. Just for a moment. Just long enough. And something she saw in his face in that half second. Not guilt, not surprise, but a very small tightening, the specific tightening of someone who has just processed information they did not expect to be visible to them yet, told her everything she needed to know about where the message had come from. She did not look away from him. That was the thing about knowing, the moment you knew, really knew, not suspected but understood, with the flat certainty of someone who had just watched a man's face process unexpected information. You had a choice about what to do with your face in the next 2 seconds. You could show what you knew. You could hide it. You could file it and move on. She filed it and moved on. "Good night, Dr. Holt," she said, in the same even tone she'd been using all day. And she stepped aside so he could pass in the corridor, and he passed. And she watched him walk to the elevator with his jacket on and his back straight and the specific, careful carriage of someone managing a situation they had not finished managing. The elevator doors closed behind him. She looked at her phone again. The image, the timestamp, the message. She thought about the 2 seconds she had just watched play out on Holt's face, the tightening, the processing. And she thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean. Having a reaction to the sight of someone's phone was not the same as sending the message. She was tired, and she had been reading people under pressure all day, and tired people made interpretive errors. She also trusted what she had seen. She forwarded the message and the image to Okafor's number without explanation, and then she sent a second text. "Received this in the corridor during the recess. Thought you should have it." Okafor responded in 40 seconds. "Thank you. I have it. Don't discuss it with anyone tonight." Dana put the phone in her pocket. Anand was waiting at the end of the corridor with her coat over her arm and the expression of someone who had used up most of what she had for the day and was running on the last of it. "You heading out?" "Soon," Dana said. "Give me a few minutes." She went back to the ICU alone. It was past 10 o'clock and the floor was in its nighttime configuration. Lower lights in the corridor, the monitoring station staffed by the smaller overnight crew, the particular hush of a clinical space that had reduced itself to the essential. She walked past the nursing station and the charge nurse on nights, a man named Brower who she'd worked with before and who looked at her temporary badge and then at her face and said nothing except, "Hey, Dana," which was the right call. She stopped at Vasquez's room first. He was asleep. Genuinely asleep. Not the restless, half-conscious drift of someone still in pain, but the deep, settled sleep of a body beginning to repair itself. His chest moved evenly. The tube drainage was minimal and clear. His monitor read stable across every parameter. She stood at the glass for a moment. There was nothing clinical to assess. She just stood there. Then she went to the room at the end of the corridor where Torres had been brought after surgery. He'd been out of the OR for 40 minutes, and he was still in the post-anesthesia stage, eyes closed, breathing through his nose, the steady, reliable rhythm of someone on the other side of the danger. His color was good, both arms at his sides. The surgical drains were doing what surgical drains were supposed to do. She looked at him through the glass for a while. She was not sure what she was doing, standing here looking at sleeping men she didn't know 3 hours ago. She was not sure she needed to be sure. There was something about witnessing the fact of survival. The simple, unglamorous, physiological fact of it, bodies breathing in beds, that she had always found necessary after difficult days. Not comforting exactly, more like completing a circuit. She turned and walked back toward the elevator. Brower looked up from the station as she passed. "He's going to do fine," he said. He meant Torres. "Rice said the repair was clean." "I know," she said. "I talked to him." "Good work today." She looked at him. It was a simple statement, and he'd said it the way people said things they meant without thinking too hard about the phrasing, and that was the version of it she wanted. "Thanks, Brower," she said. She took the elevator down. The parking structure on level 3 was mostly empty at this hour. Her car was where she'd left it, which felt like it had been several days ago and had only been 15 hours. She sat in the driver's seat with the door open and her feet on the concrete, and she did not start the engine immediately. The night air coming in smelled of exhaust and the faint damp of the city, and above the open side of the structure she could see a portion of the Kellerton city skyline, the particular light signature of a mid-sized American city at night. Not spectacular, not quiet, something in between. She had lived here for 3 years. She had moved here from a smaller city 3 states west, because Veyron General had an opening and because the city was large enough to be anonymous and small enough that you could learn it. She had learned it. She had learned the hospital. She had not expected to learn the hospital the way she had today. Her phone buzzed. Ellison. Vasquez and Torres asked me to pass something on. They said, and I'm quoting directly, "Tell her we're not even yet." They would not clarify what that meant. She read it twice. Then she wrote back, "Tell them I said the debt is cleared." Ellison. They'll argue with that. Dana. That's fine. She sat for another moment. Then she started the engine and drove home. She slept for 9 hours, which was 2 hours less than she'd told Anand she needed, and 3 more than she'd expected to get. She woke at 8:15 to 4 missed calls and 11 texts and a news alert on her phone screen that she read while still lying in bed with one eye fully open. The headline was not subtle. Military heroes, a fired nurse, and a hospital cover-up. What really happened at Veyron General. She lay there and read it. The story had most of the facts in the right order. The termination, the code, the mass casualty event, the military operators, Hask's presence at the hospital. It had Shada province in the 4th paragraph. It did not have the photograph from the anonymous message, which meant whoever had sent it had not, in fact, sent it to the 3 news desks they'd claimed. Or had sent it, and the desks had chosen not to use it without context. Either way, it wasn't there. What was there, in the 8th paragraph, was Holt's name. And in the 9th paragraph, a statement from Veyron General's communications office confirming that the hospital had initiated a formal review of personnel and clinical processes, and that the nurse in question had been reinstated effective immediately with the hospital's sincere apologies. The statement did not use Holt's name in connection with anything specific. It was careful in the way that institutional statements were careful. But his name was in the 8th paragraph and the formal review was in the 9th, and anyone reading sequentially would arrive at a conclusion without being directly handed one. She put the phone down and stared at the ceiling for a while. She thought about the message, the photograph, the specific look on Holt's face in the corridor. She thought about the fact that Okafor had it, and that Okafor had told her not to discuss it, and that Okafor ran the oversight board and had already been moving toward a formal institutional review before the message was ever sent. She thought about the particular kind of mistake that represented sending a coercive message to someone who already had every piece of documentation they needed, on the same night that the oversight board director had those same documents in her possession. Sending it, and then walking past the recipient in a corridor and not quite controlling your face. She thought about what it said about a person, not the malice of it, because malice was common enough, but the specific miscalculation. The assumption that the right kind of pressure, applied at the right moment, would shift an outcome that had already been determined by evidence. The assumption that what she had was the same as what everyone else had, which was a position that could be threatened. She got up and made coffee and stood at her kitchen window and looked at the street below, which was doing its ordinary morning things. A woman walking a dog, a delivery truck double parked, a man in a suit moving fast with a phone to his ear. The city being itself. Her phone rang. Okafor. "Good morning," Okafor said. "I hope you slept." "Some. I'm calling because I want you to know before it happens." A brief pause. "The message you forwarded last night, we were able to trace the originating number to a device registered to the hospital. Dr. Holt's office landline was used to send it. There is documentation, and it's been turned over to the board." Dana was quiet. "He sent it from his office phone," she said. "Boss." "He sent it from his office phone," Okafor confirmed, which suggests either that he was not thinking clearly at that moment, or that he believed the message would not be traced, or both. Another pause. "The board's 30-day review timeline has been accelerated. We'll be meeting again at the hospital at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Your presence is not required, but you're welcome to attend." What does accelerated mean? It means the interim measures that were put in place last night are no longer considered sufficient given the additional evidence of attempted coercion of a witness in an active oversight investigation. Okafor's voice was measured and careful, the voice of a person who chose every word deliberately. The board will be making decisions about Dr. Holt's role today rather than in 30 days. Dana looked at the street below. The delivery truck had moved on. The man in the suit was gone. The woman with the dog was at the far end of the block, the dog stopping to investigate something at the base of a lamppost. "I'll be there," she said. She arrived at Veyron General at 1:40 with her own clothes on for the first time in what felt like a different era, which was because yesterday's scrubs were in her laundry basket, and the person who had worn them to a night shift that became something else entirely was not precisely the same person who was walking through the main entrance now. Not dramatically different, not transformed, just shifted, the way things shifted when a day rearranged the landscape they were sitting in. The woman at the main reception desk looked up, and then looked again and said, "Ms. Reeves?" with a slightly uncertain quality, as if she wasn't sure whether this was the right version of the name to use. "I have a 2 o'clock with the board," Dana said. "Of course." She reached for the phone. "I'll let them know you're here." Dana sat in the lobby chairs and looked at the main entrance of the hospital. The high ceiling, the information boards, the corridor leading to the various clinical wings. She had walked through this entrance for 3 years, badge on, scrubs on, coffee in hand, the particular autopilot of a regular commute. She looked at it now with different eyes, not better or worse, just the eyes of someone who had seen the inside of the place from an angle that most people who came through this door would never see it from. A woman she didn't recognize came to meet her, younger, administrative, carrying a lanyard with a real badge rather than the temporary visitor version Hask had given her the night before. "Ms. Reeves? I'm Kellen from Mr. Farrow's office. He asked me to bring you up." Dana followed her to the elevator. In the elevator, Kellen said, "I want you to know, I work on the admin floor and I saw the news story this morning. She stopped, started again. "I've worked here for 4 years and I've never..." Another stop. "I'm glad you came back yesterday, is what I'm trying to say." "Thank you," Dana said. The elevator opened on the administrative floor, and Kellen led her to the conference room and went back to her desk, and Dana pushed the door open and went in. The room was different from the night before, more formal. A court reporter had been set up at the side table, which told Dana that what was happening this afternoon was on record in a different and more consequential way than the board meeting last night. Lester was there, and Chiao, and 2 additional board members she hadn't seen before. Okafor. Farrow, with his legal counsel. A man from the hospital system's parent organization, a regional health network, who introduced himself as Morrow, and who had the expression of someone who had driven to Kellerton that morning specifically because a situation had escalated past the level where it could be managed remotely. Holt was not there. Dana sat down. She looked at the empty chair where he had been last night, and she looked at Lester. "Dr. Holt has been informed of this meeting," Lester said, to the room generally. "He was given the opportunity to be present. He declined and submitted a written statement through his attorney." She put the statement on the table. She did not read from it aloud, but she slid a copy to each board member and to Okafor and to Farrow and to Dana. Dana read it. It was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph acknowledged that the message sent the previous evening had been inappropriate and ill-considered, and expressed regret for the distress it may have caused. The second paragraph stated that Dr. Holt was voluntarily resigning from his position as Chief of Surgical Services at Veyron General Hospital, effective immediately, while retaining his clinical privileges pending the resolution of the Oversight Board's formal review. She read it twice. The language in the first paragraph was the language of a man who had retained counsel and whose counsel had told him that inappropriate and ill-considered was the furthest he could go without implicating himself further. The voluntary resignation was, she understood, a calculation. Resigning from the leadership position before being removed from it preserved something, some degree of control over the narrative of his own departure. She set the statement down. "The resignation is accepted by the board," Lester said, "effective as stated." She looked around the table. "The Oversight Board's formal review of the institutional response to the nursing escalation will continue independently. That is not affected by the resignation." She looked at Okafor. Correct, Okafor said. The resignation affects Dr. Holt's role at this institution. It does not close the board's investigation into the institutional practices that allowed the events of yesterday to occur. We will be looking at the escalation response protocol, the personnel decision framework, and the documented pattern over the past 2 years that was raised by the nursing supervisor's statement. She looked at Pharaoh. Varen General will be expected to submit a formal corrective action plan within 60 days. Pharaoh nodded. He looked like a man who had spent the morning making phone calls he did not enjoy making. Lester looked at Dana. Ms. Reeves, the board has asked me to formally convey on behalf of the institution an apology for the manner in which you were treated yesterday morning. Not procedurally, directly. You raised a valid clinical concern through the available channels. You were terminated. The termination was wrong. She paused. The board is also prepared to discuss your role going forward at this institution, if you're willing. Dana looked at the table. She looked at Pharaoh. She looked at Lester. What role? She said. Pharaoh leaned forward slightly. The Director of Emergency and Trauma Training. It's a position we've had in the planning stage for 18 months and haven't filled. It would involve restructuring the MCY response protocol, developing the nursing escalation framework, and overseeing the continuing education program for trauma nursing staff. He paused. General Hask's office indicated interest in a formal partnership between the hospital's training program and the 9th Group's medical education component. That would be part of the scope. Dana looked at him. That partnership would mean the hospital's training protocols getting reviewed and updated based on field experience, she said. Yes. And nursing staff having direct input into escalation frameworks rather than working around them. Yes. And the MCI protocol being rebuilt from what actually happened yesterday rather than from what the existing plan assumed would happen. Pharaoh glanced at Morrow from the parent network. Morrow nodded. Yes, Pharaoh said. All of that. Dana sat with it. She had told Haas the night before that she would think about it. She had spent 9 hours thinking about it in the specific way she thought about things, not deliberating exactly, but letting the idea sit in proximity to everything she already knew and waiting to see whether it fit or didn't. She had been doing that since she woke up, probably since before she woke up. She knew what she was going to say. She had known since Pharaoh described it, but she made herself sit with the decision for one more moment before she said it, because decisions that change things deserved that, even when you already knew. I'll need the authority to actually restructure the protocols, she said. Not recommend restructuring, actually do it, with sign-off from clinical leadership but without veto from individual physicians who don't like the changes. Pharaoh looked at Morrow again. That can be structured into the position, Morrow said. It was the first thing he'd said since the meeting started, and the fact that he said it rather than Pharaoh said it told Dana something about where the authority actually sat. Then yes, she said. I'll take it. Oh, the board meeting ended at 3:40. Dana walked out of the conference room and down the administrative corridor and took the elevator to the lobby. And in the lobby, she sat in one of the chairs she'd been in 90 minutes ago, and she looked at her phone. There were messages she hadn't answered yet. Anand, twice. Ellison, once. A number she didn't recognize that turned out to be O'Brien, the young medic from Bay 7, who had texted, "Heard what happened. The guys in my unit aren't going to believe this. Thank you for everything yesterday." She wrote back, "Take care of that leg." He responded with a thumbs up and then, 2 seconds later, a second message. "We all know what you did in Shadda, just so you know." She looked at that for a moment. Then she put her phone away. Kellen from Pharaoh's office appeared at the edge of the lobby with a lanyard in her hand. A real one this time. A permanent employee badge with Dana's name and photo printed from the HR system. "They had it made this morning," Kellen said, and she looked slightly embarrassed about how pleased she was to be the one delivering it. "Mr. Pharaoh said to give it to you when the meeting was done." Dana looked at the badge. Her name, her photo. The one from her original hire. 3 years and what felt like a different geological era ago. And below it, a new title. Director, Emergency and Trauma Training. She took it. She looked at it for a moment in the way you looked at things that had the weight of more than what they were. "Thank you," she said to Kellen. She clipped it to her collar. She walked out the main entrance. Outside, the afternoon was doing what late afternoons in Kellerton did in this season, cooling fast, the light going amber and long, the shadows of the buildings stretching across the parking lot. She stood on the sidewalk in front of the main entrance and looked at the city around the hospital, at the ordinary movement of a Tuesday afternoon, people moving in and out of the building, a family arriving at the entrance with the specific collective anxiety of people who have someone inside, a hospital transport van pulling up at the curb. Anand appeared behind her. She had apparently been waiting in the lobby. "How'd it go?" she said. "He resigned," Dana said. "The leadership role, voluntarily." Anand absorbed this. Because of the message. Because of the message and the phone it was sent from, and the board meeting that was already happening regardless. So it was a combination of genuinely having no good options and making a bad one worse. That's about right. Anand looked at the badge on Dana's collar, read the title, looked at Dana. "Director," she said, "don't make it weird." "I'm not making it weird. I'm reading your badge." Anand looked at the entrance, at the lobby visible through the glass doors. "Are you going to be okay here? After everything?" Dana thought about what that question was really asking. Whether she was going to be able to walk back into this building every day and do the work without the weight of yesterday sitting on top of it. Whether the place was going to feel like the place where she was fired or the place where she worked. "It's a hospital," she said. "People need care, and the people who provide it need to know what they're doing." She paused. "That's what I'm here for." Anand nodded slowly. "That's very practical." "I'm a practical person." "You're a person who ran toward enemy fire in the dark." "That was practical too," Dana said. "The alternative was letting them die." Anand looked at her. "I don't think most people think of it that way. Most people haven't thought it through." It was almost a joke. Anand almost laughed. The afternoon light fell across the entrance in its amber way, and inside the hospital, the lobby moved through its routines. And above the emergency department entrance, visible from where they were standing, the fixed sign that had been there for as long as Dana had worked here read emergency and trauma in its clean institutional letters. She looked at those letters. She was going to change a lot about how this hospital trained its people and responded to emergencies and managed the communication between the people on the floor and the people making the calls. She was going to fight for it systematically, and she was going to do it in partnership with HASC's people, and she was going to do it with the specific knowledge of what happened when the systems failed, because she had watched them fail yesterday from the inside, and she had also fixed it from the inside, and she knew exactly where the seams were. She was not under the impression that this was going to be easy, or that the institution was going to change smoothly, or that every physician she worked with was going to welcome what she was building. She had spent her adult life working in environments where doing the right thing correctly was not the same as doing it without friction. She expected friction. She was by now very good at friction. At 4:30, she went back inside. She went to the ICU first because that was where the day had started, in a meaningful sense. Not the corridor where Holt had taken her badge, but bed 7, Gerald Foss, the vitals trending in the wrong direction on a monitor that hadn't alarmed yet. She went past the nursing station, and Brower was on days still, finishing up a handoff, and he looked at her badge and looked at her face and said, "New title. New title. Director." He tried it out. "How's that going to work with your bedside manner?" "I'm going to keep the bedside manner and add the authority to make people use it correctly." Brower looked at her for a moment. "That's either going to go very well or..." "It's going to go very well," she said. She walked past him toward the room at the end of the corridor. Torres was awake. The post-anesthesia fog had cleared and he was sitting up. Not far, the surgical drains didn't allow for much, with a tablet propped on his knees, watching something with the volume very low. He looked up when she pushed the door open. "Director Reeves," he said, and the way he said it suggested that news moved fast among people who were connected to the same networks. "How did you know that already?" "Vasquez texted me. He's not supposed to be on his phone. He's supposed to be resting." "Try telling him that." She checked his drains, checked his chart on the wall panel, looked at his vitals on the monitor. Everything was where it should be. She looked at his color, his eyes. He looked like a man who had been through surgery 6 hours ago and was not happy about it, but was clearly going to be fine. "When can I get out of here?" he said. 4 to 6 days, depending on the drains." "That's too long." That's how long it takes. She looked at him. You can argue with me about it in 4 days. If the drains agree with you, we'll revisit. He looked at her. He had the clear-eyed quality of someone no longer operating under the influence of anything except pain medication, which still left the eyes clear enough. Vasquez said you were going to stay, he said. I am staying. At this hospital. Running the trauma training program. He nodded. He looked at the tablet on his knees without reading it. Good, he said. Then, that guy who fired you. He resigned. Torres was quiet for a moment. That's, he started, and didn't finish the sentence, which was fine because the sentence didn't need finishing. It's enough, Dana said. She meant it, not in the compressed, resigned way. Not it'll have to be enough. In the simpler way. It was, actually, enough. Holt had been a chief of surgery who had fired a nurse for being right and had spent the rest of the day watching the consequences of that act assemble themselves into something he couldn't manage. And at the end of it, he had sat in a conference room and said, I'm sorry in public, without lawyering it, and then he had gone home and sent a coercive message from his office phone and resigned before the board could formally remove him. The resignation was not noble. The apology in the conference room had been real, or as real as things got in rooms like that, and the resignation was survival instinct, not conscience. But he was gone from the position. The oversight review was ongoing. The corrective action plan was due in 60 days, and Dana was going to have direct input into it. The pattern that Carol Dix had documented was now in the formal record. That was not a clean ending. It was not the ending of something that stayed ended. Holt would continue to practice medicine somewhere. The culture that had let him operate the way he had for years had not been dissolved by one board meeting. People who looked away when they should have spoken up, Carol Dix, Anand, every resident who had been in that corridor, were still going to have to live with what they'd done and hadn't done. And that was an ongoing thing, not a resolved one. But Gerald Foss was alive. Torres was alive. Vasquez was breathing with both lungs. 10 out of 11 immediate priority casualties from the morning's MCY were stable. And Dana Reeves, who had been walked out of this building by security 14 hours ago, was standing in it with a different badge and the authority to rebuild the systems that had failed. That was enough. Get some rest, she told Torres. You keep saying that. Because you keep being awake when I come in here. He smiled. Smaller than Vasquez's, more tired, but real. Noted, he said. She walked out. She found Vasquez's room and looked through the glass, and he was in fact awake, and he was in fact on his phone, and when he saw her looking through the glass, he had the exact expression of someone caught doing something they'd been told not to do. He put the phone face down on the blanket with exaggerated casualness. She pushed the door open. Torres texted me, she said. I texted Torres first, he said. It's a loop. You can't blame me for the loop. You're supposed to be resting. I rested for 6 hours. You had a tension pneumothorax retention and a chest tube placed this morning. I know, I was there. He shifted in the bed. How'd the meeting go? She looked at him. He had the specific, eager alertness of someone who had been in a hospital bed since morning with incomplete information and had been trying to fill in the gaps through a text chain with a man who had also been in a hospital bed since morning. She pulled the badge from her collar and held it up so he could read it. He read it. His face went through several things quickly. Director, he said. Director of the trauma training program. Emergency and trauma training. He was quiet for a moment. Ask, he said. It wasn't a question. He was connecting what he already knew to what he was looking at. Partly, she said. Partly me. He looked at the badge for another moment. Then he looked at her. Reeves, he said. Yeah. I know you're going to tell me this is just a job and you're going to do the work and it's practical and whatever. He paused. But for what it's worth, the guys in my unit, O'Brien, Torres, me. He stopped. Yesterday you were the person that everyone in this building needed, and the building didn't know it until they couldn't manage without you. That's not a normal thing. Most people don't have that. He looked at his hands. And most people, if they got walked out the door the way you did, would not have come back. I came back for the patients, she said. I know. He looked up at her. I know that. That's the point. She stood with that. She was not comfortable with being looked at in the way Vasquez was looking at her. It was the look of someone who had decided that what they'd witnessed mattered and wanted to say so, and she had never found a graceful way to receive that. She had spent most of her professional life receiving it gracefully, and every time she did it, it cost her something she couldn't name. Get off your phone, she said. Okay. Rest. Okay. She turned to go. Reeves. She stopped. Thank you, Vasquez said. Just that. Not elaborate. Not grateful in the performed way. The two-word version said like he meant the full weight of it. She nodded once. She walked out. The evening shift change was starting when she reached the main floor. The parking lot outside was in its 5 p.m. configuration. Half the day shift leaving, the first of the evening staff arriving, the traffic at the entrance moving in both directions. She stood at the main lobby windows for a moment and watched it. There was a thing she had thought about during the 9 hours she'd slept that had not resolved itself into anything clean. It was the question of what it cost to do what she had done. Not yesterday specifically, but across the whole span of it. Shada. The transition out. 3 years of night shifts in a place that hadn't known what it had. The morning in the corridor with her badge in a surgeon's palm. The decision to drive back. What it had cost was real. She was not going to pretend it wasn't. She had spent a year after Shada figuring out how to be in a body that had been in that kind of proximity to ending, hers and other people's. She had spent the years since in a hospital that had underestimated her so completely that the underestimation had become invisible. To the hospital, not to her. She had known what she was, every day, and had done the work of knowing it quietly, without demanding that the institution reflect it back. That was not a virtue she was going to romanticize. It had not been a choice, entirely. She had not known how to ask the institution to see her differently. She had not wanted to make a case for herself in a language she didn't fully speak, so she had done the work and waited for the work to speak. And the work had spoken yesterday in the most dramatic and expensive and least preferred way possible. She would not recommend this approach. She would not recommend swallowing what you knew in order to survive in rooms that didn't want to hear it. She would not recommend being quiet when being quiet meant someone else paid the price. She had been quiet for reasons that made sense to her, and she had been right about some of those reasons and wrong about others, and Gerald Foss had nearly died for the ones she'd been wrong about. That was not a thing she was going to carry in a way that destroyed her, but she was not going to set it down so cleanly that it disappeared either. What she was going to do was build something different, a structure where the next Dana Reeves, whoever she was, whatever she knew, whatever she had come from, did not have to choose between her badge and what she knew was true. Where the escalation pathway existed and worked and was protected. Where the charge nurses did not file transfer requests and go quietly. Where the timestamp on a chart entry was not a document of a woman trying and failing to be heard, but the first step in a system that actually moved. She had the authority to build that now. She was going to use it. She was almost at the main entrance when she heard her name. She turned. A woman was coming across the lobby. 50, maybe. Dark coat, hospital visitor badge, the specific expression of someone who has been trying to find someone for a while and has just found them. She was not crying, but she had the look of someone who had been crying recently and had decided to stop. Miss Reeves, the woman said. I'm Patricia Foss, Gerald's wife. Dana stopped. He told me, Patricia Foss said, when he woke up from recovery. The nurse who told them, he said they told him it was a nurse who identified the bleed, the nurse who came back. She stopped. I know what the hospital did to you this morning. I read the news. I know you were... She stopped again, steadied herself. I just needed to... I couldn't leave without finding you. Dana looked at her. Patricia Foss was not a small woman, but she looked smaller than she probably was, the way people looked when they had spent an entire day in the state of almost losing something. She had her hands clasped in front of her, and she was looking at Dana with the direct, unguarded look of someone who had run out of the energy required to be indirect. He would have died, Patricia said. It was not a question. He was in a serious situation, Dana said. The team responded well once they had the full picture. That's a very careful answer. It's an accurate one. Patricia Foss looked at her for a long moment. He would have died, she said again, more quietly. Not arguing, acknowledging. Dana let it sit. He's going to need monitoring over the next few weeks, Dana said. The bleed was repaired completely, but he'll have follow-up imaging and he should not be driving for at least 2 weeks. Make sure whoever does his follow-up knows about the rivaroxaban, that's the blood thinner, and the interaction. It should be in his chart now, but I'll make sure, Patricia said. I'll write it down. She was reaching for her phone. I can send you the information. Please. They exchanged numbers standing in the hospital lobby, and Dana typed out the medication name and the interaction flag and the follow-up timeline, while Patricia Foss held her phone and read it and saved it. It was not a dramatic exchange. It was the ordinary transactional business of medical follow-up, the kind of thing that happened dozens of times in this building every day. When they were done, Patricia looked at her phone and then looked at Dana. What you did, she said. Coming back. After they fired you. She stopped. Why? Dana thought about all the versions of the answer to that question that she had. The practical version, the procedural version, the version about training and reflex and the specific kind of person that experience made you. She thought about what was true. Because he needed someone who knew what they were looking at, she said. And I knew. Patricia Foss looked at her for a moment. Then she reached out and took Dana's hand in both of hers, briefly, with the uncomplicated sincerity of a person who did not have the language for what she wanted to say and was using touch instead, and then she let go. Thank you, she said. She walked back toward the patient wing. Dana stood in the lobby for a moment. The evening shift was in full motion now, the hospital populated with the next wave of people who had come to give care and receive it, and the building was doing the thing it had been doing for as long as it had been standing, admitting the sick, managing the injured, making decisions under pressure, with imperfect information and finite resources and human beings who were capable of both great clarity and catastrophic error. It would keep doing this tomorrow, and the day after, and every day she came in here. She clipped her badge to her collar. She walked out into the evening. The air was cooler now, the amber light gone to a deep blue at the horizon, the city settling into its nighttime version. She stood on the sidewalk outside the main entrance and looked at it, at the ordinary fact of a city going about its evening, cars and pedestrians, and lit windows, and the particular ambient hum of a place that didn't stop. She had been fired this morning. She was the director of emergency and trauma training tonight. Neither of those facts was the most important thing that had happened today. The most important things were smaller and more specific. A number on a monitor that she had read correctly. A medication interaction buried in an intake form that she had found in time. A needle placed in the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular, while the man attached to the chest took his first real breath in 40 minutes. A redirect in the ambulance bay that rerouted 5 patients to spaces that could actually manage them and bought 20 minutes that mattered. Those were the things. The rest, the badge, the title, the meeting, the resignation, the commendation, the photograph on the wall at Braxton. All of it was true, and none of it was the point. The point was the work. It had always been the point. She had known that when she was 23 years old and running across 40 meters of open ground in the dark toward people who were dying. She had known it when she handed her badge over in a hospital corridor. She had known it when she drove back. Here is what no institution can take from you. What you know, and what you do with it when it matters. They can take the badge. They can take the title. They can file the complaint and send the message and close the door. None of that changes what you know. None of it changes whether you act. The people who tried to reduce Dana Reeves to her employment status had made the oldest and most common mistake. They had confused the position with the person. They had looked at the scrubs and the night shift and the clipboard and seen a replaceable piece of a system, and they had not looked at what was actually standing in front of them. She was not going to be angry about that for the rest of her life. She did not have the time or the interest. She was going to build something that made it harder for the next institution to make the same mistake about the next person. She was going to train people to see clearly under pressure and speak clearly when they saw something, and to understand that the hierarchy was a tool, not a verdict. She was going to write protocols that protected the Gerald Fosses and the Danny Vasquezes and the Marcus Webbs and the people who hadn't made it into the news story and never would. She started walking toward her car. Her phone buzzed one last time. Hask. The citation is in the public record as of this morning. Thought you should know it's there. She looked at it. She thought about what it represented. Not the recognition, which she had never needed, but the correction. The closing of something that had been left open. She wrote back, "I know. Thank you." She kept walking. The parking structure was quiet at this hour on this level. Her car was where it always was. She got in, started the engine, and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel and the city visible through the open side of the structure and the badge on her collar and everything that had happened between this morning and now occupying the particular kind of space that significant days occupied. Not settled, not resolved into something simple, but real. Permanent in the way that days only became when they changed the shape of what came after. She pulled out of the space. She drove home. And behind her, at Varon General Hospital, the lights stayed on.